Hey everyone, welcome back to another deep dive into the hidden mysteries of Westeros. Tonight we're venturing into one of the most carefully guarded secrets in the entire Game of Thrones universe. A secret so dangerous that it's been buried beneath 3 centuries of lies, misdirection, and carefully orchestrated deception. You think you know the story of House Targaryen. You think you understand how the Dragon Lords fell from grace, how their bloodline was scattered to the winds, how the last dragons died screaming in the dragon pit. But what if I told you that everything you believe about the extinction of the Dragon Riders is a masterfully crafted illusion? Before we begin this journey together, take a moment to hit that like button if you're ready for tonight's revelation. And don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy these explorations into the darkest corners of Westeros. I love seeing our community grow, so drop a comment and let me know what part of the world you're listening from. Whether you're settling in for the night in New York or just waking up in Tokyo, we're all connected by these incredible stories. Now, get comfortable, maybe dim those lights, find your favorite spot, and let your mind prepare for a truth that will reshape everything you thought you knew about dragons, about power, and about the real game that was being played while kings and queens fought over the Iron Throne. Picture this. The year is 170 after Aegon's conquest. Robert Baratheon has been dead for 50 years. The Targaryens are nothing but whispered legends and cautionary tales. Westeros has settled into a new age, one where dragons are relegated to heraldry and bedtime stories. The world has moved on from the age of fire and blood. But in the shadow of ancient Pentos, in a crumbling tower that once housed Valyrian dragon merchants, something impossible happens. A maester's apprentice, researching bloodlines for a minor lord's genealogy, discovers a hidden chamber beneath what should have been solid stone. The chamber is small, forgotten, filled with the musty scent of old parchment, and something else. Something that makes the apprentice's skin prickle with recognition. Dragon scales. Not ancient, petrified remnants from centuries past. Fresh scales still holding their inner fire, still warm to the touch. But that's not the most disturbing discovery. Carved into the chamber wall, in fresh Valyrian script that someone had tried desperately to scrape away, are 3 words that should be impossible. The 7 remain. The 7 remain. 7 what? 7 dragons? 7 riders. 7 bloodlines that somehow survived the systematic extermination that followed Robert's rebellion. The apprentice's hands shake as he traces the letters, because if this is real, if 7 of something survived, then the entire history of the last 50 years is a lie. Every funeral, every monument to the fallen house, every celebration of the realm's freedom from dragonfire, all of it carefully orchestrated theater. But there's more. Hidden beneath loose stones, the apprentice finds a letter. The parchment is expensive, mirish by the feel of it, and the seal has been broken but not destroyed. It's a dragon seal, but not the 3-headed dragon of House Targaryen. This dragon has 7 heads, and its eyes seem to glitter even in the lamplight. The letter is addressed to someone called the Mourning Maiden, and it's signed with a single initial V. The contents are brief, written in the common tongue, but with an elegance that speaks of noble education. The time of silence grows short. The watchers in the east report strange lights over the smoking sea. The bloodline stirs. Prepare the children for what must come. The children, what children, and what must come. The apprentice realizes that his hands are shaking not from excitement but from fear, because there's something else in that letter, something between the lines that speaks of vast networks, of careful planning, of a conspiracy so deep and so patient that it spans generations. And then, as if summoned by the discovery itself, the apprentice hears something that stops his heart. From somewhere far above, echoing down through stone and time, comes a sound that hasn't been heard in Westeros for over half a century. The distant roar of a dragon. Not a memory, not an echo from the past. A real dragon. calling out across the night sky above Pentos. The apprentice drops the letter and scrambles toward the chamber entrance, but freezes when he hears footsteps on the stairs above. Slow, deliberate footsteps of someone who knows exactly where they're going. Someone who's been expecting this discovery. A voice calls down, cultured and calm. "You can come up now. We've been waiting for you to find it." "Why not we?" The apprentice realizes that this moment, this discovery, this entire night has been orchestrated. Someone wanted this chamber to be found. Someone wanted these questions to be asked. Someone has been watching, waiting for the right person to stumble into the truth. But as the footsteps grow closer, as the reality of the situation settles in, one terrible thought echoes through the apprentice's mind. What happens to people who learn secrets that were meant to stay hidden? What happens to those who discover that the most powerful house in the history of Westeros never actually died, but simply learned to hide in the shadows? And most terrifying of all, what are they preparing for that requires the world to believe they're extinct? Tonight, we're going to follow that apprentice up those stone steps. We're going to meet the people who have been guarding the most dangerous secret in the known world. We're going to uncover the truth about the 7 who remained, about the children being prepared, about the lights over the smoking sea that herald something the world isn't ready for. We're going to discover that while everyone was playing the Game of Thrones, the real game was being played by ghosts. Dragons that never died, riders who never fell, and a bloodline that learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the greatest power comes from being underestimated. So settle in, because this is the story they never wanted you to hear. This is the truth about the last dragon riders, and why they may not be the last after all. The game was never over. It was just moved to a board so vast that no one else even knew they were playing. The footsteps stop just outside the chamber entrance, and you realize that your life has just been divided into 2 parts before this moment, and everything that comes after. You are Lysan, 3rd son of a minor lord from the Riverlands, sent to Pentos to study under Maester Kedri because your family couldn't afford the fees at the Citadel. For 2 years, you've been cataloging bloodlines for Pentoshi merchants who want to trace their ancestry back to old Valyria, a task as tedious as it sounds. Until tonight. The chamber around you tells a story that contradicts everything you've learned. The walls are carved from the same black stone as Dragonstone, but the craftsmanship is different, more refined. These aren't the rough-hewn chambers of a fortress built for war. This is architecture meant to preserve something precious, something that required both secrecy and reverence. The dragon scales scattered across the floor catch the lamplight like scattered jewels. You've seen petrified dragon remains in the great museums of Volantis, but these scales feel alive under your fingertips. They pulse with a warmth that seems to respond to your touch, growing brighter when you hold them, dimming when you set them down. The largest scale, deep crimson with veins of gold, is nearly the size of your palm and radiates heat like a coal fresh from the fire. You can bring the scales with you. The voice calls down from above. It's a woman's voice, measured and educated, with the faint accent of someone who learned the common tongue as a second language. They were meant for you to find. Meant for you. The words send a chill down your spine, because they suggest that your presence here tonight wasn't coincidence. Someone has been watching your research, tracking your movements, waiting for you to stumble into their carefully laid trap. You gather the scales, feeling their warmth seep through your leather satchel, and climb the narrow stone stairs. Each step echoes in the confined space, and you notice that the walls here are covered in Valyrian glyphs. Not the crude approximations you see in modern Pentoshi architecture, but the flowing, complex script of the old empire. You can read some of it, enough to catch fragments. Fire made flesh, blood of the dragon, the watchers in the deep. The watchers in the deep. The phrase makes you pause. In your genealogy research, you've come across references to various Targaryen cadet branches, minor houses that claimed dragon blood through bastard lines or distant marriages. But Watchers in the Deep suggest something more organized, more purposeful than scattered survivors. You emerge into what was once the main hall of the Merchant Tower. Moonlight streams through tall windows that look out over the harbor, where Pentoshi trade ships bob at anchor. But your attention is immediately drawn to the figure waiting in the center of the room. She is perhaps 40 years of age, with the silver-gold hair that marks her as having Valyrian blood, though it's streaked with premature white that speaks of hard choices and difficult years. Her clothes are simple but expensive, the kind of understated luxury that true nobility wears when it doesn't need to prove itself. Most striking are her eyes, violet like amethysts, and ancient in a way that seems impossible for her apparent age. "My name is Valyina," she says, and the name hits you like a physical blow. "I know that means something to you, Lisan of House Mallory. Your research has been quite thorough." Valyina. It was a common name among Targaryen women, born by Aegon the Conqueror's mother and dozens of princesses through the centuries. But this woman wears it like a title, not just an echo of the past. Standing beside her is a man in the robes of a septon, but the cut and quality of the fabric suggest he serves in one of the wealthier septs. He is older, perhaps 60, with a kind of face that speaks of learning and careful thought. When he steps forward, you notice that he moves with the slight stiffness of someone who has spent years hunched over books and scrolls. "This is Septon Qyburn," Valyina says. "Not the Qyburn you've read about in the histories, but his great-nephew. The family has served as keepers of certain knowledge for generations." Qyburn inclines his head slightly. "Your research into the Blackfire rebellions caught our attention, young Maester. Particularly your questions about the missing children from the Battle of the Redgrass Field. You remember those questions? 3 Blackfire children who simply vanished from the historical record after their father's defeat. Most scholars assumed they were killed, but you'd found inconsistencies in the accounts, suggestions that someone had spirited them away before the battle's end. You weren't researching bloodlines for Pentoshi merchants," Valyina continues. "You were following a thread that led you exactly where we needed you to go. The question now is whether you're prepared for where that thread leads." The chamber around you seems to pulse with significance. You realize that this tower, which you'd assumed was just another relic of Pentos's Valyrian heritage, is something else entirely. The air tastes of dragon fire and old secrets, and every instinct you possess tells you that leaving this place will be impossible, even if you wanted to. "The dragon you heard," you say, surprised by the steadiness of your own voice. "It was real." "One of 7, Valyina replies. 7 dragons, 7 riders, 7 bloodlines that the world believes are extinct. We've spent 50 years in the shadows, Lysen, watching kingdoms rise and fall while we prepared for something the realm isn't ready to understand." 7. The number from the carved message echoes in your mind. 7 dragons means 7 adult dragons, which suggests breeding, planning, organization on a scale that would require resources and time that shouldn't exist. "Prepared for what?" you ask. Valyina and Qyburn exchange a look that speaks of long partnership and shared burdens. "For the return of winter," she says finally. "The real winter, the one that brings more than snow and cold." The words hang in the air like a prophecy, and you realize that your small quest to catalog bloodlines has led you into something vast and ancient and absolutely terrifying. Because if these people are right, if winter truly is coming in a way the world doesn't understand, then the Game of Thrones that has consumed Westeros for the past 50 years has been nothing more than a distraction from the real threat. "The choice is yours," Valyina says. "You can leave this tower tonight and forget what you've seen. We have ways of ensuring that forgetfulness. Or you can help us uncover the full truth about what the Dragon Lords knew, what they prepared for, and why they chose to hide rather than rule. And if I choose the truth, then you become part of the greatest secret in the known world. You become a guardian of knowledge that could save or damn every person alive. Her violet eyes meet yours. But you also become a target for those who benefit from that ignorance. The scales in your satchel pulse with warmth, and you realize that your choice was made the moment you heard that dragon's roar. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. I need to know, you say. Valentina smiles, and for the first time tonight, she looks genuinely pleased. Then let's begin with what you don't know about the sack of King's Landing and the 3 children who were never found. The 3 children who vanished during the sack of King's Landing were not Targaryens, as you had initially assumed, but something far more significant. They were the last living members of House Blackfire, spirited away by loyalists who understood that the dragon's blood flows through multiple streams, not just the main branch that sat the Iron Throne. Valentina leads you through passages beneath the tower that seem to extend far deeper than should be possible. The walls here are lined with obsidian mirrors that reflect your lamplight in strange ways, creating the illusion that shadows move independently of their sources. Septon Qyburn follows behind, his footsteps echoing with the measured pace of someone who has walked these paths many times before. The Blackfire Rebellion was never truly about Daemon's claim to the throne, Valentina explains as you descend. It was about preserving the bloodline when those with the sight understood what was coming. The Meisters will tell you that Daemon fought for legitimacy, for recognition, for justice. But the truth is far simpler and far more terrifying. He fought because he saw the long night in his dreams, and he knew that when it came, the realm would need every drop of dragon blood it could find. The passage opens into a vast underground chamber that defies all logic. The ceiling stretches so high that your lamplight cannot reach it, and the walls are covered in frescoes that depict dragons in flight. But these are not the familiar 3-headed beasts of House Targaryen. These dragons have 7 heads, 14 eyes that seem to track your movement, and beneath each great worm stand figures in the flowing robes of old Valyria. This chamber was built 300 years ago, Qyburn says, his voice carrying easily in the vast space. Long before Aegon ever set foot in Westeros, the Dragon Lords knew, you see. They always knew that their time in Valyria was ending, but they also knew that their purpose was far from complete. You approach one of the frescoes, and the detail becomes breathtaking. The dragons are rendered with such skill that their scales seem to shimmer in the lamplight, and the riders' faces are individual, distinct, recognizable as real people rather than mythical figures. At the base of each fresco is an inscription in High Valyrian, and though your knowledge of the ancient tongue is limited, you can make out fragments that speak of duty, sacrifice, and vigilance. Vigilance against what, you ask? Valentina touches one of the inscriptions, and to your amazement, the Valyrian letters begin to glow with a soft silver light. Against the return of the others, against the long night that comes not once every few thousand years, but in cycles that follow the birth and death of dragons. The Dragon Lords of old Valyria discovered this pattern, understood that their fire was the only thing that could hold back the ice, and they built their entire civilization around maintaining that balance. The implications hit you like a physical blow. If what she's saying is true, then every major decision in Targaryen history, every conquest, every alliance, every carefully arranged marriage was part of a larger strategy to ensure that when the others returned, there would be enough dragonfire to meet them. But the dragons died, you protest. The last one died during the reign of Aegon III. The last one that the world was allowed to see, Qyburn corrects. But by that time, the survivors had already established the preservation protocols. 7 bloodlines, 7 locations, 7 clutches of eggs hidden away where they could develop without the interference of kings or maesters who might use them for their own purposes. Valeriana leads you to the center of the chamber, where a circular table rises from the floor. The surface is carved from a single piece of dragon glass, and embedded within it are 7 dragon eggs, each one glowing with inner fire. But these are not the small fossilized relics you've seen in museums. These eggs are large, nearly the size of shields, and they pulse with life. The 3 Blackfire children were brought here, Valeriana continues, along with survivors from other cadet branches, bastards whose bloodline was strong enough to bond with dragons. Loyalists who understood that service to the realm meant more than service to any particular king. Over the past 50 years, they've built something that the world is not ready to understand. You lean closer to the dragon glass table, and the eggs respond to your proximity, their glow intensifying. One egg in particular, deep purple shot through with veins of silver, seems to call to you, and when you place your palm against the cool surface of the table, you feel a pulse that matches your own heartbeat. That one has been waiting for you, Valeriana says softly. Just as this chamber has been waiting, just as we have been waiting. Waiting for me to do what? To make the choice that your bloodline has been avoiding for 3 generations. The words hit you like cold water. My bloodline. Septon Caburn steps forward, and in his hands is a leather-bound tome that looks older than kingdoms. House Mallory has served the realm faithfully for centuries, but what your family has never known is why you were chosen for that service. Your great-grandfather, Sir Edmund Mallory, saved 3 lives during the sack of King's Landing. 3 children who should have died with their father, but who lived because a minor lord from the Riverlands chose honor over safety. He opens the tome, and you see your family's genealogy laid out in meticulous detail. But this version extends far beyond what you've ever seen. Lines of descent that connect your house to a dozen others, marriage alliances that seem random until you understand their purpose. And at the center of it all, a single notation that changes everything. Carrier of the gift. The gift, the ability to bond with dragons, is not common, even among those with Valyrian blood, Valeriana explains. It requires a specific combination of bloodlines, a genetic legacy that was carefully preserved and occasionally introduced into houses that could be trusted to guard it without understanding its full significance. Your family has carried that gift for generations, Lysan, waiting for the time when it would be needed. The purple and silver egg pulses again, and this time you feel an answering pulse in your chest, as if something long dormant is beginning to wake. The sensation is both exhilarating and terrifying, because you understand instinctively that this is a threshold moment. Once crossed, there will be no returning to the simple life of cataloging bloodlines and copying genealogies. The 3 children who were saved, you say fighting, to keep your voice steady. Where are they now? They are the foundation upon which the new Valyria has been built, Valeriana replies. Along with the survivors from 6 other bloodlines, they've spent 50 years preparing for what the ancient prophecies called the Second Long Night. They've hatched dragons, trained riders, and built a civilization in the one place the world would never think to look. Where? In the ruins of old Valyria itself. In the smoking sea, where the Doom supposedly destroyed everything. They've built a city that would make the ancient dragon lords weep with envy. The audacity of it takes your breath away. While the world believed that Valyria was a cursed wasteland where no life could survive, the survivors had returned to their ancestral home and rebuilt. They had turned the supposed devastation of the Doom into perfect camouflage for the greatest secret in the known world. But why reveal this now, you ask? Why bring me into this after 50 years of secrecy? Valeriana and Caburn exchange another of their meaningful looks, and you realize that this question strikes to the heart of everything. They haven't brought you here randomly or even because of your research skills. They've brought you here because something has changed, something that requires them to break their carefully maintained isolation. Because the Watchers in the East have seen signs that the long night approaches, Valiena says. Because the ice beyond the wall grows thicker every year, and the others have begun to stir in ways they haven't for millennia. Because the Seven Kingdoms are divided and weak, ruled by men who care more for gold than for the ancient duties that come with power. And because, Qyburn adds quietly, the survivors in New Valyria have decided that 50 years of preparation may not be enough. They need to know everything about the bloodlines that were scattered, every potential dragon rider who might exist, every scrap of knowledge that might help them when the darkness comes. You understand now why your research caught their attention, why your questions about missing children and vanished bloodlines marked you as someone worth watching. You weren't just cataloging the past, you were mapping the tools that might be needed for the future. The choice I mentioned earlier, Valiena continues, is not just about whether you want to learn the truth, it's about whether you're willing to leave this world behind and help us contact the survivors, help us prepare for what's coming, help us bridge the gap between the hidden dragons and the realm they've sworn to protect. The purple and silver egg pulses again, and this time the sensation spreads through your entire body. You can feel something awakening, not just in the dragon egg but in yourself, as if 50 years of careful breeding and ancient magic are finally coming together for their intended purpose. If I agree, you say, what happens to the life I've built here? That life was always temporary, Qyburn replies gently. From the moment you were born, Lysan, you were meant for something greater and more dangerous than cataloging merchant bloodlines. The question is whether you're brave enough to claim that destiny. You look around the chamber, at the impossible frescoes and the glowing eggs, at these two people who represent a conspiracy so vast and so patient that it spans centuries. You think about the dragon's roar you heard earlier, about the warm scales in your satchel, about the sensation of something ancient and powerful stirring to life in response to your presence. The choice, when it comes, feels less like a decision and more like an acceptance of something that was always inevitable. I need to see them, you say. I need to see the survivors, the dragons, the city they've built. I need to understand what we're truly preparing for. Valiena smiles, and for the first time since you met her, she looks genuinely hopeful. Then we begin tomorrow. The journey to New Valyria is not easy, and there are those who would kill to prevent what we're attempting. But if we succeed, Lysan, you'll witness something that no one outside the 7 bloodlines has seen in 50 years. The return of the dragons to the world? No, she says, her violet eyes reflecting the glow of the dragon eggs. Something far more significant. The return of hope. The morning brings revelation in the form of ancient texts that should not exist, and maps that redraw everything you thought you knew about the world. Valiena has led you to yet another hidden chamber, this one filled with scrolls and books that span centuries of careful documentation. The air here carries the scent of old parchment and preserved leather, but underneath lies something else, the faint aroma of dragon fire, as if these documents were created in the presence of living flame. Septon Qyburn spreads a massive chart across a table carved from what appears to be a single dragon bone. The map shows the free cities, but with details that no cartographer in Westeros has ever recorded. Hidden harbors along the coast of Pentos, secret passages through the disputed lands, and most remarkably, clear sailing routes through the smoking sea itself. The doom of Valyria was not the complete devastation that the histories claim, Qyburn explains, his finger tracing paths through waters that should be impossible to navigate. The destruction was real, but it was also selective. The dragon lords who saw it coming had time to preserve what mattered most, their eggs, their bloodlines, and most importantly, their knowledge. You study the routes marked on the map. each one annotated in different hands and different languages. Some notes are in High Valyrian, others in the bastard Valyrian of the Free Cities, and still others in scripts you don't recognize at all. But what strikes you most is how recent some of these annotations appear to be. These aren't ancient records gathering dust. This is a living document, updated regularly by people who actually travel these routes. Ships still sail to Valyria. Every month, Valena confirms, carrying supplies, carrying messages, carrying new bloodlines who prove worthy of the gift. The survivors have never been isolated. Listen, they've been recruiting. She hands you a leather portfolio bound with silver wire, and when you open it, your breath catches. Inside are detailed genealogies that make your previous research look like a child's scribbling. These charts trace bloodlines not just through the male line, as is traditional, but through every possible connection, mapping the flow of dragon blood through bastard children, forgotten marriages, and secret alliances that span the entire known world. House Celtigar, you read from one chart. I thought they died out during the Dance of Dragons. The main line did, but a cadet branch survived in Lyce, where they've been quietly marrying into the most powerful families for 2 centuries. Lord Celtigar's great-great-granddaughter currently sits on the ruling council of New Valyria. You turn the page and find another impossible survival, House Velaryon. But they lost their dragons, their fleet, everything. They lost their public presence, Coyburn corrects. But the Sea Snake's bastard son established a new fleet in the Stepstones, and his descendants have been running supplies to New Valyria for 3 generations. The ships you see in Pentos Harbor flying Pentoshi colors, half of them are actually Valerian vessels. The implications multiply with each page you turn. If these records are accurate, then dozens of supposedly extinct houses have actually survived, scattered across Essos and carefully maintaining their bloodlines, while the world forgot they ever existed. It's not just a conspiracy, it's a complete shadow civilization. But how, you ask? How does something this vast remain hidden? Valyena produces another document, this one sealed with 7 different wax seals, each bearing the sigil of one of the great families involved. The Pact of Shadows, signed in the year after Robert's Rebellion. 7 bloodlines agreed to sacrifice their public existence for the chance to prepare for the long night. They would stage their own deaths, scatter to the free cities, and spend however long it took to build the force necessary to face the others when they returned. You break the seals carefully, aware that you're likely the first person outside the 7 bloodlines to see this document. The parchment is thick and expensive, and the text is written in High Valyrian with translations in the common tongue. But what strikes you most is the formal nature of the language. This isn't a desperate agreement made by panicking survivors. It's a carefully negotiated treaty with specific terms, obligations, and contingencies. Each house contributed something different. Valyena explains as you read. House Targaryen provided the remaining dragon eggs and the knowledge of hatching. House Blackfire brought their military expertise and their network of loyalists. House Valerian offered their ships and their knowledge of the eastern seas. The other 4 houses each had their own specialties, breeding programs, ancient prophecies, financial resources, or connections to the faith. The faith? Qyburn nods toward his septon's robes. The 7-pointed star contains more references to dragons and the long night than most people realize. There are septs in the free cities that have been secretly preserving Targaryen religious texts for centuries, and certain members of the faith have always understood that the return of the others would require more than prayer. You continue reading the pact, and each clause reveals new layers of planning that stagger you with their scope. Breeding programs designed to maximize the chances of producing dragon riders, financial networks that span from Braavos to Ashai, ensuring that the survivors would never lack for resources, intelligence operations that have been monitoring the wall and the lands beyond for 50 years, watching for signs that the others were stirring. This clause here, you say, pointing to a section near the end of the document. It mentions the calling. What is that? Valiena's expression grows solemn. The moment when the survivors would reveal themselves and return to Westeros, the pact specified that the calling would only happen when 3 conditions were met. First, when the others showed clear signs of returning. Second, when the political situation in Westeros was desperate enough that dragonfire would be welcomed rather than feared. And third, when the bloodlines had produced enough proven dragon riders to make a difference. And those conditions have been met? The first 2, certainly. The Watchers beyond the wall report that the others have been seen in greater numbers than any time since the Long Night, and Westeros is ruled by a weak king surrounded by lords who care more about their own power than the realm's safety. She pauses. The third condition is what brings us to you. You look up from the pact, understanding beginning to dawn. You need more riders. We need to know how many potential riders exist, Qyburn says. The survivors have produced perhaps 20 confirmed dragon riders over the past 50 years. That's a formidable force, but the ancient texts suggest that the Long Night will require far more dragons than even old Valyria possessed at its height. Valiena moves to another section of the chamber and returns with a small chest made of dragon glass. When she opens it, the contents make your heart race. 3 dragon scales, each one warm to the touch and glowing with inner fire. But these are different from the ones you found in the hidden chamber. These scales are massive, easily the size of dinner plates, and they pulse with a deep rhythmic light that seems to match a heartbeat. These came from the 3 eldest dragons in New Valyria, she explains. Balerian's daughter, Veiga's son, and Mirax's reborn. They've been growing for 50 years, Lyson, and they're larger than any dragon that flew during the dance. But size means nothing if there aren't riders to bond with them. You reach out to touch the largest scale, the one that pulses with deep crimson light, and the moment your skin makes contact, the world explodes into vision. You see a city built into the volcanic slopes of what was once the heart of Valyria, its towers reaching toward the sky like frozen flames. Dragons wheel through the air above it, not just 1 or 2, but dozens, their roars echoing across water that steams with residual heat from the ancient doom. You see riders in armor that shimmers with dragon scale, their faces hidden behind helms shaped like dragon heads, and you understand that these are not the desperate survivors you had imagined, but a force that could challenge the armies of the 7 kingdoms. But the vision deepens, and you see beyond the city to the reason for its existence. In the far north, beyond the wall, beyond even the lands of always winter, something vast and ancient stirs to wakefulness. The others are not just returning, they're preparing for war on a scale that would make the Long Night seem like a minor skirmish. And at their head is something that defies description, a presence of such cold malevolence that even seeing it in a vision makes your soul feel frostbitten. The vision ends abruptly, leaving you gasping on the floor of the chamber. Valiena and Qyburn are both watching you with expressions of deep concern and something that might be hope. You saw them, Valiena says. It's not a question. The dragons, the city, the riders. You struggle to your feet, still dizzy from the intensity of the vision. But I also saw what they're preparing to fight. The Night King. Something worse than that. Something that makes the Night King look like a lieutenant rather than a leader. You lean against the dragon bone table, trying to process what you've seen. How long do we have? Qyburn consults a scroll covered in astronomical calculations. The Watchers believe the true stirring began 2 years ago. Based on the patterns from the first Long Night, we estimate that the others will begin their march south within the next 5 years. 5 years to find and train dragon riders, to somehow bridge the gap between the hidden survivors and the unprepared 7 kingdoms, to prepare for a war that will determine whether human civilization survives at all. The magnitude of the task seems impossible. The missing piece, you say, thinking aloud. The thing that's been deliberately hidden. It's not just about the survivors or the dragons or even the coming war. It's about something else, something that even the Pact of Shadows doesn't fully address. Valena nods slowly. You're beginning to understand. The 7 bloodlines preserve themselves. Yes, and they've built something remarkable in New Valyria. But there's a reason they've waited 50 years to reveal themselves, a reason beyond just preparation time. What reason? Because they discovered something in the ruins of old Valyria that changed everything they thought they knew about the Long Night, about the others, and about why the dragons really existed in the first place. She produces one final document, this one bearing seals that are unlike anything you've ever seen. The wax is black as midnight, and the impressions show symbols that seem to shift and change when you're not looking directly at them. This is the real secret, Lyson. The one that only the 7 bloodlines know. The one that explains why the survivors chose exile over reclaiming their birthright. Her violet eyes meet yours. The dragons were never meant to conquer. They were meant to guard. And what they were guarding against is still out there, waiting in the deepest parts of the world for its chance to return. The document crackles as you unfold it, and the text within is written in a script that seems to burn itself into your vision. But even as you struggle to read the ancient words, you understand that this knowledge will change everything. Not just about the coming war, but about the very nature of the world itself. The others aren't the real enemy, are they? You whisper. No, Valena says softly. They're just the beginning. The document with the shifting seals contains a revelation that seems to answer every question while raising a dozen more. As you read the ancient text, translated painstakingly from High Valyrian by scholars who gave their lives to preserve this knowledge, a picture emerges that makes terrible sense. The others, according to this account, were never the ultimate threat. They were created as guardians, weapons forged by an ancient civilization that existed long before the first men crossed the narrow sea. This civilization, which the document refers to only as those who came before, had faced something so terrible that they were willing to shatter the natural order itself to create a force capable of containing it. The Deep Ones, you read aloud, struggling with the archaic language. Beings of shadow and hunger that dwell in the spaces between the world's foundations. The others were made to stand eternal watch against their return, to guard the gates that hold them in the deep places. Septon Qyburn nods gravely. The first, Long Night wasn't an invasion, it was a containment breach. The Deep Ones found a way to corrupt the others, to turn the Guardians into servants of the very thing they were meant to contain. The logic is elegant and horrifying. It explains why the others have always seemed more like a force of nature than a conquering army, why they bring the cold and death but seem to have no clear purpose beyond spreading both. They were corrupted tools, still trying to fulfill their original function but twisted into something monstrous. And the dragons? The dragons were the response. Valena explains. Those who came before created the others, but when the others were corrupted, they needed something else. Something that could burn away the corruption, seal the gates, restore the natural order. You continue reading, and the pieces fall into place with satisfying precision. The Dragon Lords of Old Valyria weren't conquerors who happened to tame dragons. They were the inheritors of an ancient duty, the keepers of the flame that held back the darkness. Every dragon hatched, every rider bonded, every generation of careful breeding was part of a grand strategy to maintain the barrier between the world and the Deep Ones. The doom of Valyria, you say, understanding flooding through you. It wasn't an accident or divine punishment, it was sabotage. The Deep Ones' influence had been growing for centuries, Thorburn confirms, working through corrupted bloodlines, through ambitious lords who thought they could control powers beyond their understanding. When they finally struck, they didn't just destroy the freehold, they weakened the barriers that kept the Deep Ones contained. The document goes on to describe the desperate measures taken by the surviving Dragon Lords. Some fled to Dragonstone and eventually conquered Westeros, maintaining what strength they could in exile. Others went deeper, returning to the ruins of Valyria itself to rebuild the ancient protections at their source. Both groups understood that the barrier between worlds was failing, that the corruption was spreading, and that eventually the Deep Ones would break free entirely. That's why the survivors in New Valyria have been preparing, you say, not just for the return of the others, but for what the others were originally meant to contain. Exactly. And that's why they've been so careful about revealing themselves. The battle against the Deep Ones can't be fought with conventional armies or political alliances. It requires dragonfire, yes, but it also requires knowledge, preparation, and above all sacrifice on a scale that would make the Dance of Dragons look like a training exercise. The weight of this revelation settles over you like a heavy cloak. Everything makes sense now. The careful preservation of bloodlines, the secret city built in the heart of ancient ruins, the patient waiting while the Seven Kingdoms tore themselves apart in petty conflicts. The survivors haven't been hiding from the world. They've been protecting it from something the world couldn't possibly understand. So the plan is to wait until the others begin their march south, then reveal the dragons and unite with Westeros to push them back. Valena and Qyburn exchange one of their meaningful looks, and you realize that your logical conclusion has missed something important. That would be the plan, Valena says carefully, if the others were still trying to contain the Deep Ones. But the Watchers in New Valyria have discovered something troubling. She produces another map, this one showing the lands beyond the wall in far greater detail than any chart you've ever seen. The cartography is recent, clearly drawn by people who have actually explored these frozen wastes, and what it shows challenges everything you thought you knew about the far north. The others aren't gathering to march south, she explains. They're gathering around specific locations, places where the barriers between worlds are thinnest, and they're not trying to strengthen those barriers. They're trying to tear them down. The corruption that began during the first long night has finally completed its work. The others are no longer guardians fighting their programming. They're fully converted servants of the Deep Ones, working to create a permanent breach between the worlds. The implications hit you like physical blows. If the others succeed in tearing down the barriers, the Deep Ones won't just influence events from the shadows, they'll enter the world directly, bringing with them a form of existence so alien and hostile that human civilization wouldn't survive the first moments of contact. How long, you ask? Though you're not sure you want to know the answer. The calculations are complex, Qyburn says, but based on the gathering patterns and the rate at which the barriers are weakening, perhaps 2 years before the first breach, 5 years before total collapse. 2 years. The time frame that had seemed impossibly short for preparing to face the others now seems luxuriously long compared to what you're actually facing. The Deep Ones aren't a distant threat that might emerge someday. They're an immediate danger that could end everything within the span of a few seasons. But we have advantages that those who came before didn't have, Valena says. And for the first time since the conversation began, she sounds genuinely hopeful. We have dragons that have been breeding for 50 years, riders who have been training their entire lives, and most importantly, we have the complete knowledge of what worked before. You look up from the maps and documents, feeling as though you've aged years in the past few hours. What worked before? Fire and blood, but applied with precision rather than conquest. The Deep Ones can corrupt living beings, but they can't corrupt dragon fire itself. A coordinated strike at the right moment, targeting the specific points where the barriers are weakest, could not only prevent the breach, but actually strengthen the containment. The plan she outlines is breathtaking in its audacity. Rather than waiting for the others to make their move, the survivors would strike first, Dragon riders would hit every gathering point simultaneously, burning away the corruption that allowed the others to weaken the barriers, while simultaneously reinforcing the ancient protections with fresh dragon fire. It could work, you say, studying the marked locations on the map. If you have enough dragons, enough riders, enough coordination, that's where you come in, Coyburn says. The survivors in New Valyria have 20 confirmed dragon riders, possibly a few more if some of the younger candidates prove successful. But the ancient texts suggest that this operation will require at least 50 riders, possibly more. You need me to find the bloodlines. We need you to find everyone with even a trace of the gift, everyone who might be able to bond with a dragon if given the chance. Valina's violet eyes burn with intensity. The survivors have been careful, systematic, but they've also been isolated. There are bloodlines they don't know about, potential riders who have never been tested, possibilities that only someone with your research skills could uncover. The task seems impossible, but the alternative is literally unthinkable. You look around the chamber, at the ancient documents and glowing dragon scales, at these two people who represent the last hope of preventing an apocalypse that most of the world doesn't even know is coming. The false conclusion, you say suddenly, understanding flooding through you. We're assuming that the plan will work, that 50 dragons will be enough, that we can coordinate strikes across the entire north without the others detecting what we're doing. Valina nods slowly. You're learning to think like one of us. Yes, there are assumptions built into this plan that may not hold true when tested against reality. And if we're wrong, then we fall back to the final contingency, Coyburn says quietly. The one that the survivors in New Valyria hope they'll never have to use, which is complete containment. Seal off the entire north with dragonfire, abandon everything beyond a line from the wall to the neck, and hope that a smaller, more defensible area can be held indefinitely. The casual way he describes the abandonment of half a continent tells you everything you need to know about how desperate the situation truly is. These aren't optimistic plans for victory, they're damage control scenarios for managing the least catastrophic form of defeat. But first, Valina says, we try the coordinated strike, and for that, we need riders. We need to know exactly how many people in the world carry the gift, where they are, and how quickly they can be brought to New Valyria for training. She hands you a list of names and locations that spans several pages. Some of the entries are complete, with detailed genealogies and current addresses. Others are fragmentary, just hints and possibilities that would require extensive investigation to confirm. This is everyone the survivors know about, she explains. But it's not enough. There are gaps in the records, bloodlines that were lost track of during the chaos after Robert's rebellion, potential candidates in the far reaches of Essos that no one has ever investigated. You study the list, your mind already beginning to organize the research that would be required. It's the kind of comprehensive genealogical project that could take years under normal circumstances, but with the world potentially ending in 2 years, normal circumstances are a luxury you can't afford. I'll need resources, you say. Access to records, travel funds, contacts in the free cities who can open doors that would normally be closed. Already arranged, Coyburn replies. The survivors have been preparing for this phase of the operation for decades. You'll have whatever you need. And when I find them, the potential riders, you bring them to us, Valina says, prayerfully quietly, with stories that won't raise suspicions about what they're truly being recruited for. The world isn't ready for the truth about the Deep Ones, but individuals can be brought to understanding gradually. You fold the list carefully, and tuck it into your robes alongside the dragon scales that started this entire journey. The weight of both feels like a promise and a burden, the tools that might save the world, or the evidence of your failure if you can't use them effectively. When do I start? Tomorrow, Valina says. The first ship leaves for Tyrosh at dawn, and the captain has instructions to take you wherever your research leads. But listen, remember what we discussed about the dangers. There are others who know fragments of this truth. People who would kill to prevent the dragons from returning or to claim that power for themselves. I understand. I hope you do. Because once you leave this chamber, once you begin actively searching for dragon riders, you become a target for forces that have been hiding in the shadows for as long as the survivors themselves. The thought should terrify you, but instead it fills you with a strange sense of purpose. For the first time in your life, your skills as a researcher, your obsession with bloodlines and genealogies, your talent for uncovering connections that others miss, all of it has meaning beyond academic curiosity. There's something else, Valiana says, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Something we haven't told you about the current situation in New Valyria. Your heart sinks because you've learned enough about these people to know that when they lower their voices, the news is never good. The 20 confirmed dragon riders aren't all adults, she continues. 7 of them are children, the youngest barely 10 years old, and of the adult riders, 3 have never actually flown their dragons into combat. The implications are staggering. The force that you've been thinking of as the salvation of the world is largely composed of untested children and inexperienced adults against the others and whatever lies beyond them. Such a force would be courageous but ultimately inadequate. The children have bonded with dragons before, you protest, thinking of the historical accounts you've read. During the Dance of Dragons, some of the most effective riders were barely old enough to sit a saddle. In peacetime, with dragons that had been domesticated for generations, Qyburn points out, the dragons in New Valyria are different. They've been bred for size and power, not docility. They're closer to their wild ancestors than any dragon that flew during the Targaryen era, and that makes them both more dangerous and more difficult to control. Valiana moves to a cabinet you hadn't noticed before, and withdraws a leather tube. From it she produces a rolled painting that when spread across the dragon bone table takes your breath away. It shows 3 dragons in flight, but these are not the sleek, almost serpentine creatures depicted in most Targaryen art. These dragons are massive, their wings broad enough to blot out the sun, their heads crowned with horns and crests that speak of wild majesty. Valyrian's daughter, she says, pointing to the largest dragon, whose scales seem to absorb light rather than reflect it. She's nearly twice the size her namesake ever achieved, and her fire burns hot enough to melt stone. But she's only had one rider in her 50 years of life, an old man who died peacefully in his sleep 5 years ago. Since then she's rejected every candidate who's attempted to bond with her. Vigar's son, she continues, indicating a dragon whose blue-green scales shimmer like deep water. Smaller than his female companion, but faster and more aggressive. His current rider is barely 16 years old, and the bond is still fragile. In a real battle, there's no guarantee that the dragon would obey commands or that the rider could maintain control under stress. And this one, you ask, pointing to the 3rd dragon, whose red and gold coloring makes it look like a creature of living flame. Mirax is reborn, the most unpredictable of the 3. She's had 4 riders over the years, and she's killed 2 of them, not in battle, not through enemy action, but in fits of rage when they failed to understand her moods. Her current rider is a woman of 40, skilled and experienced, but even she admits that every flight could be her last. The painting shows the dragons as magnificent, terrifying, godlike in their power, but Valiana's words reveal the truth behind the majesty. These aren't the controlled weapons of war that the Targaryens once wielded. They're barely domesticated forces of nature, as likely to turn on their own riders as to burn their enemies. You see the problem, Qyburn says. Even if we find 50 potential riders, even if all of them prove capable of bonding, we still face the question of whether enough dragons can be safely controlled to execute the coordinated strike. How many dragons are there in total? 37 confirmed adults, perhaps a dozen juveniles that might be old enough to ride by the time we need them. Valina rolls up the painting carefully. But adult dragons aren't horses that can be saddled and ridden by anyone with the skill. Each bond is unique. Each relationship requires years to develop properly. We're asking people to forge connections in months that normally take decades. The scope of the challenge grows clearer with each revelation. It's not enough to find people with dragon blood. You need to find people who can form bonds quickly, maintain control under pressure, and coordinate with dozens of other riders in an operation that requires split-second timing across hundreds of miles. The children, you say, thinking of the 7 young riders. How did they manage to bond so quickly? They didn't. Valina replies grimly. They were bonded as infants, placed in the same chambers as dragon eggs so that they could grow up together. It's an old technique, mentioned in some of the Valyrian texts, but it's incredibly dangerous. 3 children died in the first year, burned alive when their dragon's fire first manifested. But the survivors formed perfect bonds with dragons that are still growing, still developing their full power. When those dragons reach maturity, when their fire burns hot enough to melt castle walls, will 7-year-old minds be able to control them? She shakes her head. We're building our strategy on the assumption that child riders will be able to manage adult dragons, and that assumption may prove fatal. You study the maps again, looking at the marked locations where the others are gathering, trying to visualize the coordinated strike that would be necessary to prevent the barriers from falling. Even with perfect riders on perfectly controlled dragons, the logistics would be nightmarish. With inexperienced riders on unpredictable dragons, the operation seems impossible. There has to be another way, you say. Some alternative that doesn't require 50 perfectly coordinated dragon strikes. Valina and Qyburn exchange another look, and this time you can read the communication passing between them. They have considered alternatives, but those alternatives are even worse than the plan they've described. The ancient texts mention other methods, Qyburn says slowly. Ways to strengthen the barriers that don't require dragon fire. What methods? Blood magic, specifically the voluntary sacrifice of entire bloodlines to fuel protective wards that could last for millennia. The casual way he mentions the extinction of entire families tells you everything you need to know about how desperate their situation truly is. These aren't theoretical discussions about possible strategies, they're practical evaluations of which form of catastrophe might be preferable. How many bloodlines? All of them. Every family with even a trace of dragon blood would need to participate. The magic requires willing sacrifice, complete commitment, and the understanding that success means the permanent end of the bloodlines that make the sacrifice possible. You think about the families listed in the genealogies, the scattered survivors who have spent 50 years preserving their heritage, the children being trained to ride dragons they may not be able to control. All of it would end, not in glorious battle, but in ritual sacrifice designed to protect a world that doesn't even know it needs protection. And if we chose that path, the barriers would hold for another age, perhaps longer. The deep ones would remain contained. The others would return to their original purpose, and the world would continue without ever knowing how close it came to ending. Valina's voice carries a weight that speaks of long nights spent contemplating this choice. But there would never be dragons again, never be dragon riders, never be the possibility of human beings wielding the kind of power that could reshape civilizations. The price of safety is the permanent loss of greatness, you murmur. Exactly. And that's why the survivors in New Valyria have chosen to try the coordinated strike first. Not because it's more likely to succeed, but because it offers the possibility of victory without requiring the complete sacrifice of everything they've worked to preserve. The weight of understanding settles over you like a funeral shroud. These people aren't heroes in the traditional sense. They're pragmatists making impossible choices between different forms of extinction. The coordinated strike isn't a battle plan. It's a desperate gamble with the fate of the world as the stakes. But there's still hope, you say, more to convince yourself than to seek confirmation. There's always hope, Valiana agrees, but hope tempered by reality. The coordinated strike could work if we find enough riders, if the dragons can be controlled, if the others don't detect our preparations, if the barriers hold long enough for us to act. And if any of those conditions fail, then we move to blood magic, and we pray that our sacrifice will be sufficient to protect a world that will never thank us for it. The conversation has come full circle, from the revelation of the Deep Ones to the stark choice between desperate action and ultimate sacrifice. You understand now why the survivors have waited 50 years to reveal themselves, why they've been so careful about who they trust with the truth. This knowledge is too heavy for most minds to bear, too terrible for most hearts to accept. I'll find the riders, you say finally. However many exist, wherever they are, I'll bring them to you. And if there aren't enough, then we'll face that choice when we come to it. But until we know for certain that the coordinated strike is impossible, we have to believe it can work. Valentina smiles, and for the first time since you've known her, the expression reaches her eyes. Now you sound like one of us. Welcome to the conspiracy. Listen of House Mallory. May you prove more successful than any of us have dared to hope. The ship that carries you away from Pentos 3 days later bears the colors of a Tyroshi trading vessel, but the crew moves with the precision of trained sailors who have navigated far more dangerous waters than the summer seas between the free cities. Captain Maros introduces himself as a descendant of House Roger, one of the ancient Lycene families that claimed distant kinship to the Dragon Lords, and his knowledge of hidden harbors and secret routes suggests that this journey has been planned for far longer than the few days since your recruitment. Your first destination is the Disputed Lands, specifically a ruined keep that once belonged to a cadet branch of House Blackfire. According to the genealogies that Valiana provided, 3 members of that branch survived the various rebellions and established themselves as sellsword captains in the service of different free cities. Their descendants, if any exist, would carry bloodlines that trace back to both Blackfire and Targaryen roots, making them potentially valuable candidates for dragon bonding. The keep sits on a hill overlooking the trade road between Tyrosh and Mai, its towers broken, but still proud against the morning sky. As your small party approaches, you notice that the ruins aren't as abandoned as they first appeared. Smoke rises from what was once the Great Hall, and there are horses in the courtyard, well cared for animals that speak of current occupation rather than casual travelers seeking shelter. Septon Kyburn, who has accompanied you on this first stage of the search, points out details that your untrained eye would have missed. The banners flying from the walls are faded, but still identifiable as belonging to the Golden Company, one of the most famous sellsword organizations in Essos. More significantly, the specific design is that of the company's Blackfire supporters, sellswords who have maintained their loyalty to the Pretender dynasty, even decades after the last rebellion failed. They know we're coming, Kyburn murmurs, as armed men emerge from the keep to watch your approach. The question is whether they'll welcome us or try to kill us. The answer comes in the form of a woman who strides out to meet you, halfway between the road and the keep's entrance. She is perhaps 30 years old, with the silver-gold hair that marks her as having Valyrian blood, but her bearing is that of a professional soldier rather than dispossessed nobility. Her armor is practical rather than ornate, her weapons well-maintained, and her eyes hold the wariness of someone who has survived by trusting no one completely. "I am Captain Denina of the Golden Company," she announces, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. "You are the researcher that the Morning Maiden told us to expect." The Morning Maiden. You file away the confirmation that Valeriania's network extends even to the sellsword companies, that the conspiracy of survivors has agents and allies in places you hadn't imagined. I am Lisan, seeking information about bloodlines and genealogies on behalf of certain interested parties. Certain interested parties. Dadena's mouth quirks in what might be amusement. Yes, we know about the interested parties. The question is whether you're prepared for what you'll find here. She leads you through the keep's courtyard, where you see evidence of the community that has established itself in these ruins. There are workshops for maintaining weapons and armor, stables for dozens of horses, and what appears to be a small sept built into one of the tower bases. But most significantly, there are children, dozens of them, ranging in age from toddlers to teenagers, and every one of them bears the silver hair and violet eyes of Valyrian heritage. The Golden Company has served many causes over the centuries, Dadina explains as you walk. But our true purpose has always been preserving the bloodlines of those who were driven from Westeros by usurpers. We've married carefully, bred selectively, and maintained detailed records of every child born to our members. How many? In this chapter alone, 43 confirmed descendants of either Blackfire or Targaryen lines, 31 of whom are of age to potentially bond with dragons. She stops in the center of the courtyard and turns to face you directly. But we've already been tested, Master Lysan. Tested and found wanting. Tested how? Instead of answering, she leads you into the Great Hall, where the smoke you saw earlier proves to come from a forge that has been built into what was once the Lord's High Table. Working at the forge is a man whose age is difficult to determine, but whose skill with dragon-forged steel is immediately apparent. The blade he's shaping glows with an inner fire that speaks of Valyrian craftsmanship, and the hammer he wields bears runes that seem to shift and change in the firelight. Master Tobo Mott, Danina says by way of introduction, late of King's Landing, now serving as our smith and keeper of certain knowledge. The name strikes you like a physical blow. Tobo Mott was the master armorer who trained Gendry, Robert Baratheon's bastard, and who worked exclusively with Valyrian steel. His presence here, in a ruined keep filled with Blackfire descendants, suggests connections that run far deeper than you had imagined. The boy king had me followed, Mott explains, setting down his hammer and turning to face you. Joffrey suspected that I knew too much about bastard bloodlines, about the secrets that certain High Lords wanted kept hidden. So I took my knowledge and my tools and came here where my skills could serve a worthier cause. And the testing that Captain Danina mentioned, Natu moves to a cabinet and withdraws something wrapped in black silk. When he unfolds the cloth, you see a dragon egg, smaller than the ones in Valeriana's chamber, but unmistakably real. The shell is deep purple with veins of silver, and unlike the eggs you've seen before, this one is cracked, showing glimpses of something that might once have been a hatchling. 3 years ago, the survivors in New Valyria sent us this egg, along with instructions for awakening it. They needed to know if any of our bloodlines were strong enough to hatch dragons without the benefit of growing up alongside them. His expression grows grim. We tried everything, fire and blood, ancient rituals, even the sacrifice of willing volunteers. Nothing worked. The egg died. The egg was never alive to begin with, Dadina says. Or rather, it was alive, but our bloodlines weren't strong enough to complete the connection. The hatchling died during the attempt, and we learned that having dragon blood isn't the same thing as having the gift. The implications are devastating. If a community of 43 confirmed descendants couldn't successfully hatch a single dragon, how many potential riders could possibly exist in the scattered populations of Essos? How many bloodlines would prove strong enough in theory, but inadequate in practice? But you haven't given up, you say, noting the hopeful expressions on the faces around you. We've changed our approach, Mott replies. Instead of trying to hatch new dragons, We've been preparing for the possibility of bonding with existing ones, training our people in the old techniques, teaching them the high Valyrian commands that dragons understand, preparing them for the possibility that they might be called to New Valyria. He leads you to another section of the hall, where a dozen young people are engaged in what appears to be a form of ritual combat. But as you watch, you realize that their movements follow patterns described in ancient texts, stylized recreations of the way dragon riders once fought alongside their mounts. The training is beautiful and deadly, turning human fighters into extensions of draconic will. The dragons in New Valyria are wild, you see. Dinah explains. Wilder than any dragon that flew during the Targaryen era. They need riders who can match their ferocity, who can earn their respect through strength rather than just bloodline heritage. And have any of your people shown promise? 3, she says, pointing to a young man who moves through the combat forms with fluid grace. Adrian there has dreamed of dragons since childhood, and the dreams have grown stronger over the past year. When he sleeps, he sees through dragon eyes, feels the wind beneath dragon wings. The second, my daughter, Rhaena. She's only 14, but she has the gift of understanding dragon speech. When we play recordings of dragon roars from the old days, she can interpret the meanings, tell us what the dragons were trying to communicate. The third candidate proves to be a surprise. An elderly woman named Visenya, who sits in a chair near the great hearth, her hands working constantly at some form of needlework. She looks up as you approach, and her eyes are milky with cataracts, but when she speaks, her voice carries an authority that commands immediate attention. You're the one who's been having the dreams, she says before anyone can introduce you. Dragons calling to you across the narrow sea. Voices in languages you don't recognize but somehow understand. You stare at her in shock because she's described experiences you haven't mentioned to anyone. Dreams that have been growing stronger since your encounter with the dragon scales in Pentos. How do you know? Because I've been having them too, child. For 50 years, ever since the dragons supposedly died, I've been dreaming of voices calling from the ruins of Valyria, telling me to wait, to prepare, to keep the bloodline strong until the time of awakening arrived. She sets down her needlework, and you see that it's not random stitching, but a map worked in threads of silver and gold that seem to shimmer with their own light. The map shows the smoking sea in incredible detail, including islands and passages that don't appear on any chart you've ever studied. The dragons never left Valyria, she continues. They went deep into the hidden places where the ancient magic still flows freely. They've been waiting, breeding, growing stronger while the world forgot they ever existed. And now they're ready to return. Ready for what? For the war that's coming. Not the war that men expect with armies and sieges and political maneuvering, but the real war. The one that will determine whether the world continues to exist or falls into darkness so complete that even the memory of light will be lost. Her words echo what you learned in Pentos, but hearing them from this elderly woman who has spent decades dreaming of dragons gives them a weight that theoretical knowledge couldn't provide. The dragons are real. The war is coming, and the time for preparation is rapidly running out. The Golden Company will answer the call, Dana says formally. When the Morning Maiden sends word that the time has come, we'll bring our strongest candidates to New Valyria for testing. But Master Lisann, you should know that we're not the only ones who've been preparing. What do you mean? There are others who know fragments of the truth, not the complete picture that you've been given, but enough to understand that dragons are returning and that dragon riders will soon be needed. Some of these people are allies, working toward the same goals we serve, but others have their own plans, their own ideas about how dragon power should be used. And those others, they've been recruiting too, Morta says grimly, gathering bloodlines, making promises, building their own networks of potential riders. When the dragons do return, There's going to be competition for who gets to bond with them. The thought sends a chill down your spine. You've been thinking of your mission as a simple matter of finding potential riders and bringing them to New Valyria for training. But if other groups are engaged in the same recruitment, if there are competing visions for how dragon power should be deployed, then the situation is far more complex and dangerous than anyone has admitted. How do we know who to trust? Carefully, Virginia says, her blind eyes seeming to see directly into your soul. The dreams that call to true dragon blood carry certain signs, certain markers that can't be faked or mimicked. But be warned, young researcher, not everyone who claims to hear dragon voices is telling the truth, and not everyone who seeks to bond with dragons wants to use that power for the good of the realm. As if summoned by her words, a commotion erupts from the courtyard outside. Shouts, the sound of weapons being drawn, and underneath it all, a sound that makes your blood freeze in your veins, the distant roar of something vast and angry approaching from the eastern sky. Denina draws her sword with fluid grace. It seems your presence here has attracted attention, Master Lyson. The question now is whether that attention comes from friends or enemies. Through the hall's windows, you see shapes moving against the evening sky, too large to be birds, too purposeful to be natural phenomena. Dragons, but not the magnificent creatures depicted in Vallena's paintings. These dragons are smaller, darker, and they move with the aggressive intent of predators hunting prey. Wild dragons, you ask hopefully. Worse, Virginia says, her needlework falling forgotten to the floor. Those are bonded dragons, carrying riders who don't serve the same masters we do. The war for control of the returning dragons, you realize, has already begun. The dragons descending from the eastern sky move with the calculated precision of military formations, their riders clearly visible as dark silhouettes against the deepening twilight. As they draw closer, you can see that these are not the massive wild-bred creatures that the survivors in New Valyria have been raising, but smaller, more agile beasts that have been trained for warfare rather than raw power. Captain Denina organizes the defense of the keep with the efficiency of someone who has faced dragon attacks before, which tells you more about the current state of the world than any amount of research could have revealed. The Golden Company members move to prepared positions, some carrying crossbows fitted with what appear to be Valyrian steel bolts, others manning siege engines that have been cunningly disguised as ruined stonework. The Crimson Order, Visenya calls out, her blind eyes somehow tracking the approaching dragons with uncanny accuracy. I can hear their mounts' voices, feel the corruption in their bond songs. They've been hunting bloodlines for 3 years now, claiming potential riders for their own purposes. What purposes? You shout back, taking cover behind a collapsed section of wall as the first dragon begins its attack dive. They believe that the returning dragons should serve new masters, not the old bloodlines, Denina replies, loosing a crossbow bolt that strikes one of the smaller dragons in the wing membrane. The creature shrieks in pain and fury, but continues its descent. They think the Targaryens and their allies had their chance and failed, that fresh blood should guide the dragons in the coming war. The philosophy has a certain logic to it, but watching these dragons attack a keep filled with children and elderly craftsmen, you understand that the Crimson Order's methods are far from noble. Their dragons breathe fire that burns with an unnatural crimson light, and the flames seem to cling to whatever they touch, continuing to burn long after the initial blast has passed. Master Tobho Mott emerges from his forge carrying a sword that glows with the same inner fire you saw in his smithing, but this blade is complete, its edge sharp enough to cut through the very air. Lightbringer's Echo, he calls it, and when he swings it at the first dragon rider to land in the courtyard, the Valyrian steel passes through the man's armor as if it were made of parchment. The battle is brief but intense, a clash between two different visions of what the return of dragons should mean for the world. The Golden Company fights to preserve the old ways, the careful breeding programs and ancient traditions that have sustained dragon blood for centuries. The Crimson Order attacks with the fury of revolutionaries, seeking to overthrow the established order and replace it with something entirely new. But as you watch the combat unfold, you begin to notice patterns that speak to something far more ancient than this particular conflict. The way the dragons move, the formations they adopt, the specific techniques their riders employ, all of it echoes descriptions you've read in the oldest Valyrian texts. This has happened before, you realize, the words escaping before you can stop them. Vizinia, somehow hearing you over the sounds of battle, nods grimly. Every time the dragons return, every time the bloodlines grow strong enough to support multiple riders, the same conflicts arise. Different names, different faces, but the same fundamental question: who has the right to wield the power of dragons? The pattern becomes clearer as you think about the history you've studied. The Dance of Dragons wasn't just a succession crisis, it was a proxy war between different philosophies of dragon use. The Blackfire rebellions weren't merely about legitimacy, they were about whether the dragons should serve the existing order or forge a new one. Even the doom of Valyria itself might have been the result of similar conflicts, different factions of dragon lords turning their power against each other until the entire civilization collapsed. The cycle, you whisper, understanding flooding through you like cold water. It's not just about the Long Night and the others, it's about this. Every time dragons return, they bring with them the same fundamental choice, and every time the choice tears apart the civilization that wields them. One of the attacking dragons, wounded by multiple crossbow bolts, crashes into the keep's main tower with a sound like thunder. Its rider, a woman in armor that bears the Crimson Dragon sigil of their order, rolls clear of the wreckage and comes up fighting. She's young, perhaps no older than you, with the silver hair of Valyrian descent and eyes that burn with fanatical conviction. "The old ways are dead," she shouts, her sword clashing against Dahina's blade. "The ancient bloodlines had their chance and failed. The dragons deserve masters who will use their power to reshape the world, not preserve the mistakes of the past." "And you think you know better than 3 centuries of careful tradition," Dahina replies, her own blade work precise and deadly. "You think wisdom comes from revolution rather than preservation." "I think wisdom comes from results," the Crimson Order rider responds. "And the results of the old ways are visible everywhere. A world divided by petty kings, threatened by ancient evils, saved only by the sacrifices of people who get no recognition for their service." The philosophical debate continues even as they fight, each sword stroke punctuating arguments that have been raging in different forms for millennia. You realize that this isn't just a battle between 2 groups of dragon riders, it's a manifestation of the eternal tension between tradition and innovation, between preserving the past and embracing change. The tide of battle turns when Arion, the young man who has been dreaming of dragons, does something unexpected. Instead of joining the physical combat, he stands in the center of the courtyard and begins to sing in High Valyrian, his voice carrying melodies that seem to resonate with something deep in the dragon's nature. The effect is immediate and profound. The attacking dragons slow their assault, their heads turning toward the source of the song with expressions that almost seem puzzled. The largest of the creatures, a deep red beast with wings like stained glass, actually lands and approaches Arion with what can only be described as curiosity. "Dracaris ro hakaya," Arion sings, the words flowing with such natural grace that they seem to come from somewhere beyond conscious thought. "Valer morgulis, si valer do haris." The dragons respond to the ancient phrases, their aggressive postures relaxing as they recognize something in the young man's voice that speaks to their deepest nature. Even the wounded dragon that crashed into the tower raises its head to listen, its eyes reflecting an intelligence that goes far beyond mere animal cunning. The bond songs Vizinia breathes, her voice filled with wonder. He's singing the Bond songs that were lost during the Doom. How does he know them? I don't know, Arion replies, his normal voice seeming strange after the musical perfection of his Valyrian singing. The words just come to me, like they've always been there, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The Crimson Order riders, seeing their mounts' pacified state, begin to withdraw from the combat, but their leader, the young woman who had been fighting Dataina, approaches Ariane with an expression of mingled awe and calculation. "You have the gift," she says, her sword lowered but not sheathed. The true gift, not just the ability to bond with dragons, but to understand their deepest nature. The Crimson Order could use someone with your talents. The Golden Company already has that someone, Denna replies, moving to stand protectively near Arion. And unlike your order, we don't steal potential riders from their chosen paths. Chosen paths. The Crimson Order rider laughs, but there's no humor in the sound. You think any of us chose this? You think we woke up one morning and decided to dedicate our lives to preparing for a war that most people don't even believe is coming? Her words strike closer to home than you're comfortable admitting. None of you chose this path in any meaningful sense. You were all drawn into it by forces beyond your control, by bloodlines and gifts and ancient prophecies that shaped your destinies before you were even born. The difference, Vizenya says, her voice carrying the authority of her years and her visions, is that some of us accept the burden of our heritage, while others try to escape it by destroying what came before. And some of us, the Crimson Order rider replies, understand that heritage without evolution is just another form of death. The philosophical divide runs deeper than mere disagreement. It touches on fundamental questions about the nature of power, responsibility, and change. The Golden Company represents the careful preservation of ancient traditions, the belief that wisdom comes from maintaining the practices that have worked in the past. The Crimson Order embodies the revolutionary impulse, the conviction that old ways must be swept aside to make room for new solutions. But as you watch the dragons respond to Arion's singing, you begin to understand that both approaches might be missing something essential. The dragons themselves don't seem to care about human political philosophies or historical grievances. They respond to authenticity, to the genuine expression of the bond that connects dragon and rider at the deepest level. There's a third option, you say, the words emerging from some deep place of understanding. Neither pure preservation nor complete revolution, but synthesis, taking the best of the old ways and combining them with the innovations that the new situation requires. Both groups turn to look at you, and you realize that your role in this conflict is not to choose sides but to help forge a new approach that transcends the ancient divide. The Bond songs that Arion is singing, you continue, they're not just preserved tradition or revolutionary innovation. There's something that emerges naturally from the connection between human and dragon, something that can't be forced or manufactured but has to be discovered anew by each generation. The Crimson Order rider considers this, her eyes studying Arion with new interest. You're suggesting that the true path forward requires elements from both our approaches. I'm suggesting that the dragons don't care about our human divisions, you reply. They respond to genuine connection, to riders who understand that bonding with a dragon isn't about imposing human will on draconic nature, but about finding the harmony that allows both species to achieve their full potential. The conversation is interrupted by the approach of new dragons from the western sky, but these creatures move with the measured grace of peaceful intent rather than aggressive purpose. As they draw closer, you can see that their riders wear the colors of New Valyria, the deep purple and silver that marks them as representatives of the survivors who have been preparing for this moment for 50 years. It seems our debate has attracted attention from the highest levels, Dinah observes, her hand still resting on her sword hilt but her posture relaxed. The lead dragon, a magnificent creature whose scales shimmer like liquid mercury, lands with surprising gentleness in the keep's courtyard. Its rider dismounts with fluid grace, removing a helm that reveals features you recognize from the genealogies you've been studying. High cheekbones, violet eyes, and silver hair that marks her as pure Valyrian stock. "I am Rhaenyra the Second," she announces, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Daughter of the line that never died, heir to the throne that was never truly lost. And I have come to offer both your orders a choice." The appearance of a living Targaryen princess changes everything. The philosophical debate between preservation and revolution suddenly seems secondary to the reality of actual royal blood standing before you, backed by the power of dragons that have been growing in strength for half a century. "What choice?" both Daenerys and the Crimson Order rider ask simultaneously. Join with us in the coming war. Accept the leadership of those who have spent their lives preparing for this moment, and help us save the world from the darkness that approaches. Her violet eyes sweep across the assembled crowd, taking in the Golden Company members, the wounded dragons, and the battle-scarred keep. Or continue your petty conflicts while the real enemy gathers strength beyond the wall, and watch as your philosophical differences become irrelevant in the face of extinction. The choice she offers is stark and immediate: unity or annihilation, cooperation or irrelevance. But as you look at the faces around you, you realize that the ancient echoes of division and conflict run deeper than any single decision can resolve. The return of the dragons hasn't just brought back the possibility of power, it's revived all the old questions about how that power should be used and who has the right to wield it. The war that's coming, you understand, will be fought on multiple fronts against the others and whatever lies beyond them, but also against the human tendency to turn every tool of salvation into a weapon of division. Princess Rhaenyra the Second's presence transforms the ruined keep from a battlefield into something approaching a diplomatic summit, though the tension in the air remains thick enough to cut with a blade. Her dragon, the magnificent silver-scaled creature she calls Dreamfire's heir, settles into the courtyard with the patient dignity of a creature that knows its own power and feels no need to display it aggressively. The princess herself proves to be far more complex than the simple royal authority she initially projected. As she speaks with the various faction leaders, you begin to understand that her 50 years of preparation in New Valyria have given her insights that go beyond mere military strategy or political maneuvering. "The conflicts between your orders are not accidental," she explains, as the various groups gather in the keep's great hall. "They are part of a pattern that has repeated itself every time dragon power has returned to the world. The same divisions, the same philosophical arguments, the same tendency for those who should be allies to become enemies." "You're saying this is inevitable?" the Crimson Order rider asks. Her name, you learn, is Baela Vex, a descendant of House Velaryon, who rejected the survivors' careful preservation methods in favor of more aggressive recruitment tactics. "I'm saying it's orchestrated," Rhaenyra replies, her violet eyes reflecting the firelight with an intensity that speaks of knowledge dearly bought. The survivors in New Valyria have spent decades studying the patterns, tracing the threads that connect each cycle of dragon return and dragon conflict. What we've discovered is that the divisions aren't natural. They're encouraged by forces that benefit from keeping dragon riders divided. The implication hangs in the air, like smoke from a dying fire. If the conflicts between dragon riders are being manipulated by outside forces, then every philosophical argument, every territorial dispute, every clash of ideologies serves someone else's purpose. "What forces?" Master Tobomot asks, his smith's pragmatism cutting through the political complexity. "Who benefits from keeping us divided?" Instead of answering directly, Rhaenyra produces a scroll case made of what appears to be dragon bone, carved with symbols that seem to shift and change when observed directly. From it she withdraws documents that make the genealogies and maps you've seen look like children's sketches. The faceless men of Braavos have been documenting unusual deaths among potential dragon riders for the past 30 years. She begins, spreading the first document across the table. Accidents, illnesses, murders, disguised as robberies or random violence. The pattern was subtle at first, but when mapped against the bloodline charts, it becomes clear that someone has been systematically eliminating the strongest candidates. The document shows a map of Essos marked with hundreds of small symbols, each one representing the death of someone who carried dragon blood. The density of marks in certain areas is staggering, particularly around the Free Cities and the Dothraki lands, where Targaryen descendants were most likely to have settled. But that's not the most disturbing discovery, she continues, producing a second document. The Maesters of the Citadel have been keeping their own records, supposedly for historical purposes. But when our agents gained access to their archives, we found something that changes everything we thought we knew about the conspiracy. This document is written in the flowing script of the Citadel, but its contents are anything but academic. It details a secret organization within the Order of Maesters, a group that calls itself the Order of the Green Hand, dedicated to ensuring that dragons never return to power in Westeros. They were involved in the death of the last Targaryen dragons. Rhaenyra explains, not just through the poison they fed to the dragons in the dragon pit, but through a systematic campaign to eliminate the knowledge necessary for hatching new ones. Maester Aemon's exile to the Wall wasn't punishment for his bloodline. It was a way to ensure that his knowledge couldn't be used to restore dragon power. The revelation strikes you like a physical blow. Maester Aemon, the wise old man who served the Night's Watch for decades, was essentially a prisoner, kept in the most remote location possible to prevent him from helping restore his family's heritage. But Aemon died years ago. Septon Kirban points out, surely the threat from the Maesters died with him. The Order of the Green Hand has been recruiting new members for generations, Rhaenyra replies grimly, and they've expanded their operations beyond Westeros. Some of the deaths in our assassination map, they were carried out by Maesters trained in Old Town, then sent to the Free Cities ostensibly to serve as healers and advisors. She produces a third document, this one bearing the seal of the Iron Bank of Braavos. The financial records are even more damning. The Iron Bank has been funding both sides of conflicts involving dragon descendants, ensuring that any attempt to unify the bloodlines results in warfare that weakens everyone involved. Both sides? Baela Vex's voice carries a note of dangerous realization, including the Crimson Order. Including everyone, Rhaenyra confirms. The Golden Company, the various sellsword organizations, even some of the merchants who've been providing supplies to potential dragon riders. The Iron Bank has been playing a game that spans decades, using financial leverage to ensure that dragon power remains divided and weak. The scope of the conspiracy is breathtaking. It's not just about preventing dragons from returning, it's about ensuring that if they do return, they'll be controlled by divided antagonistic groups that will destroy each other rather than unite against common threats. But why, you ask, though part of you already suspects the answer. Why would the Iron Bank care about dragons? Because dragons represent a threat to the established order, Captain Dana says. The soldiers' instincts grasping the political implications immediately. A united dragon force could reshape the balance of power across both Westeros and Essos. The Iron Bank's influence depends on maintaining the current system of competing kingdoms and city-states. It goes deeper than that, Rhaenyra says. The Iron Bank has been receiving guidance from someone with intimate knowledge of dragon capabilities and weaknesses. Someone who understands exactly how dragon power works and how it can be neutralized. Someone from the bloodlines themselves. Someone who was once part of the survivors' community in New Valyria, but who left under circumstances that suggest fundamental disagreements about strategy and purpose. The implications are staggering. A traitor from within the survivors' ranks, someone with access to their most closely guarded secrets, working with external forces to ensure that dragon power remains fragmented and ineffective. Who? Baela Vex demands, her hand moving instinctively to her sword hilt. Maester Marwyn, Rhaenyra replies, and the name lands like a thunderclap in the sudden silence. Marwyn the Mage, the Archmaester who openly studied sorcery and magic, who disappeared from Old Town years ago, amid rumors that he had gone mad or been assassinated by his more conservative colleagues. If he's alive and working against the Dragon Restoration, then the survivors face a threat that understands their capabilities better than any external enemy could. Marwyn knows everything, Septon Qyburn says, his voice hollow with realization. The hatching techniques, the bonding processes, the locations of bloodline communities, even the details of the preparation for the long night. If he's turned traitor, then every move we make has been anticipated. You finish. Every plan we form has been compromised before we can implement it. Rhaenyra nods grimly. The survivors in New Valyria have been operating under the assumption that secrecy was their greatest protection. But if Marwyn has been feeding information to their enemies for years, then secrecy has become a liability rather than an asset. How long have you known? Master Tobulmot asks. 6 months. We discovered the connection when one of our supply ships was attacked by pirates who knew exactly what cargo it carried and where it was most vulnerable. The attack was too precise to be coincidental, and the subsequent investigation led us to financial records that connected the pirates to the Iron Bank, and from the Iron Bank to Marwyn, through a chain of intermediaries that would have been impossible to trace without inside knowledge of how the bank operates. Marwyn has been very careful, very patient, but he's also been very thorough in his betrayal. The revelation reshapes everything you thought you understood about the current situation. The conflicts between Dragon Rider factions aren't just philosophical differences, they're the result of deliberate manipulation by someone who knows exactly how to exploit the weaknesses in Dragon Rider psychology. The question now, Rhaenyra continues, is whether we can overcome decades of carefully orchestrated division and unite against the common threat. Not just the others and what lies beyond them, but the human enemies who've been working to ensure that dragon power remains fragmented. What do you propose? Baela Vex asks, though her tone suggests she's already guessing the answer. Full disclosure. Complete transparency between all factions about our capabilities, our plans, and our intelligence. It's the only way to counter Marwyn's advantage. And if some of our people refuse to cooperate, then we'll know they're either working for Marwyn or they're too compromised by pride to be trusted with the fate of the world. The choice she's offering is stark. Surrender the independence and secrecy that have protected each faction in exchange for the possibility of effective cooperation against a threat that knows all their weaknesses. There's something else, you say, pieces of the puzzle suddenly clicking into place. If Marwyn has been orchestrating conflicts between Dragon Riders, then he's also been preventing the formation of the unified force necessary to face the others. The long night isn't just approaching, it's been enabled by the very divisions he's been creating. Exactly. Rhaenyra confirms. Every year we've spent fighting each other is a year the barriers have grown weaker, a year the others have had to gather strength without facing coordinated dragon fire. Marwyn hasn't just been working against Dragon Restoration, he's been actively aiding the forces that threaten to destroy the world. But why? Arian asks, his young voice carrying a note of genuine confusion. If the others succeed, if the barriers fail completely, Marwyn dies along with everyone else. What could he possibly gain from enabling the end of the world? Power, Visenya says from her chair by the fire, her blind eyes somehow seeming to see more clearly than anyone else's. Not power over the world as it is, but power over whatever emerges from its ashes. Marwyn believes he can control the forces of destruction, bend them to his will, become the ruler of whatever remains after the current age ends. And if he's wrong, then his pride will have doomed every living thing in the known world, Rhaenyra replies. that pride has always been the greatest weakness of those who seek to wield power beyond their understanding. The conversation is interrupted by the sound of horns from the keep's watchtowers, a signal that more dragons are approaching, but this time the sound carries a note of welcome rather than alarm. Reinforcements from New Valyria, Rhaenyra explains, rising from her seat. If we're going to unite the factions, we'll need to do it quickly. Marwyn's network will have detected this gathering, and they'll be moving to disrupt it before we can establish effective cooperation. As dragons begin to fill the evening sky, their riders bearing the colors of a dozen different factions and bloodlines, you realize that the next few hours will determine not just the success of the dragon restoration, but the survival of human civilization itself. The war for the future of the world is about to begin, and the first battle will be fought not against the others, but against the human weakness that has always been dragons' greatest enemy, the inability to unite in the face of existential threat. The dragons that fill the darkening sky above the ruined keep represent more than military reinforcements. They are living proof that the age of fire and blood never truly ended, only transformed into something more patient and far more dangerous. As the various riders land in the courtyard and surrounding fields, you begin to understand the true scope of what the survivors in New Valyria have accomplished over the past 50 years. These are not the desperate remnants you had imagined, clinging to ancient traditions in hidden caves. These are the heirs of the greatest civilization the world has ever known, and they have spent 5 decades preparing for a war that will determine whether human knowledge and culture survive the coming darkness. Princess Rhaenyra introduces you to riders whose very existence rewrites the history you thought you knew. Daemon Blackwater, whose great-grandfather was supposedly killed during the Blackfire Rebellion, but who actually escaped to Tyrosh and founded a dynasty of dragon breeders. Viserys Storm, descendant of one of Aegon IV's many bastards, who has spent 30 years mapping the migration patterns of wild dragons in the Grey Waste. Aerys Naharis, whose bloodline traces back to the dragon lords of Old Valyria through marriages that predate the conquest by centuries. Each rider brings with them not just military capability, but knowledge that has been preserved in isolation, allowed to develop along paths that would have been impossible under the scrutiny of maesters and kings. The result is a body of dragon lore that surpasses anything that existed during the height of Targaryen power. The bonds we forge with our dragons are different from those described in the histories. Daemon Blackwater explains as his mount, a deep blue creature with wings like stained glass, settles beside Dreamfire's heir. The old Targaryens thought of dragons as weapons to be controlled, tools to enforce their will upon the world. We've learned to think of them as partners in a dance that spans lifetimes. The distinction proves to be more than philosophical. As you watch the interactions between riders and dragons, you see a level of harmony that goes beyond the master-servant relationships described in historical accounts. These dragons respond to their riders' emotions, anticipate their needs, and most remarkably, seem to share in their memories and experiences. Balarion's daughter carries within her the memories of every dragon she's ever been bonded with. Viserys Storm explains, gesturing toward the massive black dragon that dominates the center of the courtyard. Not just her immediate rider, but echoes of every human consciousness that has ever touched the Draconic Network. The Draconic Network. The connections that exist between all dragons, regardless of breeding or location. We've discovered that dragons share a form of collective memory, a way of passing knowledge and experience between individuals that allows the species to learn and adapt across generations. The implications are staggering. If dragons possess collective memory, then every technique developed by dragon riders throughout history is potentially accessible to current practitioners. More importantly, if the network extends to wild dragons, then the creatures you're preparing to face the others with already understand the nature of the threat they're being asked to confront. The others have their own network, Aerys Naharis adds, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won knowledge. a connection that binds them to their masters and allows for coordination across vast distances. The coming war won't just be between individual combatants, it will be between two different forms of collective consciousness. Princess Rhaenyra guides you to a section of the keep where her people have established what can only be described as a field laboratory. Ancient texts lie open beside modern maps. Dragon scales are arranged in patterns that seem to pulse with inner light, and most significantly, a series of scrying mirrors reflect images that come from locations hundreds of miles away. The Watchers beyond the wall have been sending us intelligence for months, she explains, adjusting one of the mirrors to show a vista of ice and shadow that makes your blood freeze despite the warm evening air. The others aren't just gathering, they're experimenting, testing new forms of corruption, developing tactics that go beyond anything they used during the first long night. The images in the mirrors show landscapes that seem to exist in perpetual twilight, where the very ground has been transformed into something that hurts to look at directly. Structures that might once have been castles or towns now serve as focal points for energies that bend reality around them, creating pockets of space where the normal laws of nature no longer apply. The barriers between worlds aren't just weakening, you realize, studying the impossible geometries displayed in the scrying mirrors. They're being deliberately restructured. Exactly. The others aren't trying to break through to our world, they're trying to merge our world with theirs. Instead of invasion, they're attempting transformation on a scale that would make the doom of Valyria look like a minor accident. The strategy is elegantly terrifying. Rather than conquering territory that would then need to be held and defended, the others are transforming the very nature of reality itself. If they succeed, there won't be a world left to rule. There will only be an extension of the realm they already inhabit. And our dragons can stop this. Our dragons can disrupt it. Damon Blackwater corrects. Dragon fire doesn't just burn, it purifies. It can restore corrupted space to its natural state, but only if applied with precision and perfect timing. The Zera Storm manipulates another mirror, showing you a map of the north that reveals the true scope of the challenge. Dozens of corruption sites spread across the landscape like a plague, each one connected to the others by lines of force that pulse with malevolent energy. The coordinated strike we discussed isn't just about attacking the others directly, she explains. It's about severing these connections simultaneously, preventing the corruption sites from reinforcing each other while we work to cleanse them individually. How many riders would that require? At minimum, 73. One for each major site, plus reserves to handle unexpected complications or secondary targets that might emerge during the operation. The number is devastating. Even combining all the factions represented at the keep, you can count perhaps 40 confirmed dragon riders, and that includes children whose bonds are still developing and adults whose experience is limited to peacetime flying. We're not strong enough, you say, the words escaping before you can stop them. Not yet, Princess Rhaenyra agrees. But we're not finished recruiting. The bloodlines you've been tasked with finding aren't just potential additions to our force, they're essential components of the minimum viable army. She produces another document, this one bearing seals from locations you've never heard of, cities in the Far East, kingdoms beyond the Bone Mountains, settlements in the Shadowlands that supposedly contain nothing but ruins and demons. The dragon diaspora extends far beyond what anyone in Westeros has ever imagined, she continues. When old Valyria fell, some dragon lords fled west to Dragonstone, but others went east, south, north, seeking refuge in lands so remote that no historian has ever chronicled their existence. And they survived. They more than survived. Some have built civilizations that dwarf anything in the known world. Others have gone native among peoples who worship dragons as gods. A few have become something that might not be entirely human anymore, but which retains the essential gift of dragon bonding. The scope of the revelation forces you to completely reconsider everything you thought you understood about the world's geography and political structure. While Westeros and the Free Cities have been engaged in their petty conflicts, entire dragon-riding civilizations have been developing in isolation, pursuing paths of evolution that may have produced capabilities far beyond anything the Targaryens ever achieved. The hidden kingdoms of the Jade Sea maintain fleets of dragons that can breathe underwater, Eris Naharis explains. The sky cities of the Grey Waste have developed techniques for keeping dragons aloft for months at a time. The fire temples of Ashai have learned to bond with dragons that exist partially in other dimensions. Other dimensions? The barriers between worlds work both ways. Vezera Storm says, while the others are trying to merge their realm with ours, some dragon riders have learned to project their consciousness into parallel spaces, giving them access to dragons that exist in multiple realities simultaneously. The implications multiply faster than you can process them. If dragons can exist in multiple dimensions, if riders can project consciousness across realities, then the coming war will be fought on fronts that you lack the conceptual framework to even understand. But there's a cost, Princess Rhaenyra adds, her voice carrying a note of warning. The techniques developed by the distant kingdoms come with prices that some would consider unacceptable. The underwater dragons require their riders to undergo transformations that make them more sea creature than human. The sky riders become so adapted to flight that they can no longer survive on solid ground. The dimension-walking fire priests sacrifice their ability to exist fully in any single reality. And if we need their help, then we'll have to decide how much we're willing to sacrifice to gain the power necessary to save the world. Some of the Eastern techniques could give us the 73 riders we need, but the people who undergo those transformations might not be recognizably human by the time the process is complete. The choice she describes echoes themes that have run through every stage of your journey. The tension between preservation and change, between maintaining what you are and becoming what you need to be. But now the stakes are absolute, and the timeline is measured in months rather than years. There's something else, Daemon Blackwater says, his expression grave. Something that the survivors in New Valyria discovered only recently, and which changes our understanding of why the barriers are failing so rapidly. He produces a scroll that seems to be made of dragon wing membrane, translucent but incredibly strong, covered with script that glows faintly in the evening light. The language is High Valyrian, but so archaic that even your trained eye struggles to parse the meanings. This was found in the deepest vaults beneath New Valyria, in a chamber that had been sealed since before the Doom. It's a record kept by the Dragon Lords who saw the destruction coming, their final attempt to preserve knowledge that they knew would be essential for whoever came after. You lean closer to study the document, and gradually the words begin to resolve into meaning that chills your soul. The doom of Valyria wasn't just a catastrophic accident or the result of human arrogance. It was a deliberate sacrifice, a desperate attempt to prevent something far worse from emerging into the world. The deep ones we discussed earlier, you read slowly, translating the archaic Valyrian as you go. They weren't contained by the barriers. They were never separate from our world at all. They exist in the spaces between thoughts, in the gaps between heartbeats, in the darkness that lives inside every conscious mind. The barriers weren't keeping them out, Princess Rhaenyra explains. The barriers were keeping them from taking complete control of human consciousness. And when the Dragon Lords realized that the barriers were failing anyway, that the Deep Ones had found ways to corrupt the protective wards from within, they chose to destroy their entire civilization rather than let it be used as a gateway for complete mental domination. But the sacrifice wasn't complete. The destruction of Valyria disrupted the Deep Ones' plans for centuries, but it didn't eliminate them. They've been working since then to rebuild their influence, to find new ways to breach the mental barriers that prevent them from taking direct control of human minds. And they're succeeding. The rise of the others, the conflicts between dragon riders, the systematic elimination of bloodlines capable of resisting mental influence, all of it serves their ultimate purpose. They don't want to invade our world, they want to inhabit our minds. The revelation reframes everything you've learned in terms so fundamental that you feel as though you're learning to think for the first time. The war isn't about territory or power, or even survival in any conventional sense. It's about whether human consciousness will remain independent or become extensions of an alien intelligence that views individual awareness as a disease to be cured. The coordinated dragon strike, you say, understanding flooding through you like ice water. It's not just about cleansing corruption sites. It's about creating a psychic barrier strong enough to protect human minds from direct mental invasion. Dragon fire purifies more than just corrupted matter. The Zera storm confirms it burns away external influences that try to reshape consciousness itself. But the protection only lasts as long as the dragons maintain their vigilance. Meaning that if we succeed in stopping the current crisis, we'll need to establish a permanent network of dragon riders whose sole purpose is maintaining humanity's mental independence. Not ruling kingdoms or commanding armies, but serving as eternal guardians of human consciousness itself. The scope of the commitment is breathtaking. Success won't mean victory and return to normal life. It will mean accepting responsibility for protecting the minds of every person who will ever be born for as long as human civilization exists. And if we fail, then humanity becomes a hive mind controlled by entities that view individual thought as an aberration to be corrected. Princess Rhaenyra says simply, everything that makes us human disappears, replaced by perfect unity under alien direction. The choice, when it comes, feels less like a decision and more like an acceptance of destiny that was always inevitable. You look around at the gathered riders, at their dragons, at the ancient documents and scrying mirrors that reveal the true scope of the threat facing the world. How do we begin? We start by accepting that the person you were when you entered that hidden chamber in Pentos no longer exists, she replies. That life, those goals, those limitations, they were all part of a smaller world that's about to end whether we succeed or fail. The question is what you choose to become in the larger world that's emerging. The transformation, you realize, has already begun. The great hall of the ruined keep transforms over the following hours into something that has not existed since the height of old Valyria, a true council of dragon lords, gathering knowledge from across the known world and beyond. Representatives from factions you had never imagined possible arrive throughout the night, each bringing scrolls, artifacts, and wisdom that has been preserved in isolation for generations. From the Shadowlands beyond Ashai comes Melara the Undying, whose pale skin bears tattoos that move and shift like living flames. She brings with her texts inscribed on scales taken from dragons that died during the Long Night itself, chronicles of the first war against the Deep Ones that predate any history known in Westeros. The ancient dragon lords understood something that we have forgotten, she explains, her voice carrying the weight of centuries despite her youthful appearance. Dragons are not weapons of war, they are instruments of consciousness. Each bond between rider and dragon creates a node in a network that spans dimensions, connecting minds across space and time in ways that make conventional magic seem like parlor tricks. The texts she shares are unlike anything you have ever seen, written in a script that seems to rearrange itself as you read, conveying meaning through direct transmission rather than symbolic interpretation. The knowledge they contain challenges your understanding not just of dragons, but of the nature of reality itself. During the first long night, you read from one of the scale texts, the words forming in your mind rather than on the page. The dragon riders discovered that consciousness itself is the battlefield. The others were not seeking to kill or conquer, but to simplify, to reduce the chaotic complexity of individual awareness into patterns that could be easily controlled. And they succeeded, partially. adds Koronos the Deep Walker, whose origins lie somewhere in the ruins of the Roiner cities. His dragon, a creature whose scales shift color like water, reflecting changing light, rests beside pools that have formed in the keep's lower chambers. The survivors of that war were changed, reduced in some essential way that made them more vulnerable to external influence. From the Summer Islands comes Captain Alara Redwen, whose ancestry traces back to Targaryen marriages that were arranged centuries before the conquest to establish alliance networks across the known world. Her ships carry more than trade goods. They transport libraries that contain the collected wisdom of dragon-riding traditions that developed in complete isolation from Westerosi influence. The bonds we forge with our dragons in the Summer Islands are based on harmony rather than dominance, she explains, her voice carrying the musical cadences of her homeland. We learned long ago that trying to control a dragon's will inevitably leads to corruption of the rider's consciousness. Instead, we seek balance, finding ways to merge human and draconic awareness without losing what makes each species unique. The techniques she describes sound almost mystical until you see them demonstrated. Alara's dragon, a magnificent golden creature whose wings span wider than the keep's courtyard, responds to her rider's emotions and intentions with a precision that goes beyond training or conditioning. They move together as a single entity, yet both retain their individual consciousness. The key is understanding that dragons experience time differently than humans do, she continues. They perceive the flow of cause and effect across much longer spans than we can comprehend naturally. When you bond with a dragon, you gain access to that expanded temporal awareness, but only if you're willing to let go of the illusion that the present moment is all that exists. Septon Coyburn, who has been taking notes throughout these revelations, looks up from his scrolls with an expression of growing understanding. The prophecies in the old texts, the references to the prince that was promised, they're not talking about a single individual appearing at a specific time. They're describing a state of consciousness that becomes possible when human and draconic awareness merge properly. Exactly, confirms Visenya, the elderly woman whose needlework maps have proven to contain geographical knowledge that no living cartographer possesses. The prince that was promised is not a person. It's a way of being that allows individuals to perceive and interact with reality across multiple timelines simultaneously. From the eastern reaches beyond Yt comes Maester Vagan, whose chain bears links of materials that don't exist in Westerosi forges. His studies at the secret citadel of Carcosa have given him insights into the relationship between knowledge and consciousness that reframe everything you thought you understood about learning and memory. The Deep One's ultimate weapon is not force but certainty, he explains, his aged hands manipulating instruments that seem to bend light around them. They offer freedom from doubt, from the burden of choice, from the pain of individual responsibility. Many who encounter them choose corruption willingly because it promises an end to the difficulties of independent thought. And the Dragon Rider's defense? Embracing uncertainty, accepting doubt as a necessary component of consciousness, understanding that the pain of choice is what makes awareness valuable in the first place. He produces a sphere of crystallized dragon fire that pulses with inner light. When you bond with a dragon, you don't gain certainty, you gain the capacity to act decisively, despite uncertainty, to make choices that matter, even when you can't be sure of their consequences. The gathered wisdom creates a picture of the coming conflict that is both more complex and more fundamental than you had imagined. The war will not be won through superior tactics or greater numbers, but through the willingness of individual minds to resist the seductive promise of unified consciousness under alien direction. Princess Rhaenyra synthesizes the various streams of knowledge into a strategy that is breathtaking in its scope and terrifying in its requirements. The coordinated strike we discussed is only the beginning. Even if we succeed in disrupting the other's current plans, we'll need to establish something that has never existed before, a permanent network of dragon riders dedicated to protecting the independence of human consciousness. The Dragon Watch, Captain Dinah suggests, her military experience providing practical structure for the philosophical concepts being discussed. More than a watch, corrects Melara the Undying, a new form of civilization, one that exists specifically to maintain the barriers between worlds while allowing for continued human development and growth. The vision they outline is simultaneously inspiring and daunting. Rather than returning to the old systems of kings and lords, the Dragon Riders would establish networks of cooperation that span continents, united by shared purpose rather than political allegiance. Their dragons would serve not as weapons of conquest, but as guardians of the spaces between thoughts, the moments where individual consciousness decides whether to remain independent or surrender to collective unity. The transformation required goes beyond learning new techniques or bonding with dragons. Eris Naharis points out, we're talking about evolving into something that might no longer be entirely human, at least not in ways that current humans would recognize. The Eastern kingdoms have already begun that evolution. The Zera Storm replies, consulting maps that show territories beyond the edge of known geography. Some willingly, others as a survival response to pressures we're only beginning to understand. And their results? Mixed. Some have achieved forms of consciousness that allow them to resist Deep One influence completely, but at the cost of losing the ability to relate to unmodified humans. Others have found ways to enhance awareness while maintaining emotional connections, but their enhanced perception makes normal life unbearably intense. From the Basilisk Isles comes Lord Commander Hygen, whose Order of Dragon Knights has spent centuries perfecting techniques for combat in multiple dimensions simultaneously. His insights into the practical aspects of fighting enemies that exist partially outside normal reality provide crucial tactical knowledge for the coming conflict. The others we'll face are not the same entities that appeared during the first long night, he warns, his scarred face bearing testament to battles fought in realms where physical laws operate differently. They've been evolving, learning, adapting their strategies based on their previous defeat. They understand now that direct confrontation plays to our strengths. What approach will they use instead? Subversion from within. Rather than attacking from beyond the wall, they'll work to corrupt key individuals who can open pathways from inside our defenses. Dragon Riders, because of our enhanced consciousness, are particularly vulnerable to this form of infiltration. The warning reshapes the entire strategic picture. If the enemy's primary tactic is internal corruption, then the greatest threat comes not from external armies, but from the possibility that members of the Dragon Rider network itself could be turned against their fellows. How do we defend against something like that, you ask, though part of you dreads the answer? By accepting that some of us will inevitably be corrupted, and by building our network to continue functioning even when significant portions of it are compromised. Princess Rhaenyra replies with the calm of someone who has spent years contemplating this possibility. Meaning that every Dragon Rider must be prepared to act independently if necessary, to make decisions that could affect the fate of the world without consulting higher authorities or waiting for collective consensus. Her violet eyes meet yours. It means accepting responsibility for the continued existence of human consciousness with all the weight that such responsibility entails. The conversation continues through the night, with each new revelation adding layers of complexity to an already overwhelming situation. You learn about dragon breeds that exist in perpetual migration between dimensions, about riders who have learned to split their consciousness across multiple timelines, about techniques for preserving individual awareness even while participating in collective dragon networks. But underneath all the technical knowledge and strategic planning runs a deeper current of understanding, the recognition that success in the coming conflict will require not just courage or skill, but a fundamental willingness to evolve beyond current human limitations, while somehow remaining true to the essential qualities that make human consciousness worth preserving. As dawn approaches, the various representatives begin to disperse, returning to their hidden kingdoms and secret strongholds to begin preparations for the final phase of the conflict. But before they leave, each contributes something to a collective pool of resources that will support the search for additional dragon riders. The bloodlines you seek exist, Melara the Undying tells you as she prepares to depart for the Shadowlands. But they are scattered across distances that span not just geography, but time itself. Some of the potential riders you need to find haven't been born yet, while others died centuries ago but left echoes in the draconic network that can still be awakened. How do I find echoes of the dead? By learning to perceive time as dragons do, as a landscape that can be traversed rather than a river that can only be followed downstream. She hands you a scale from her own dragon, and its touch fills your mind with sensations of vast temporal distances. The scale will guide you to the resonance points where past and present intersect, where the consciousness of ancient dragon riders can still influence current events. The other representatives provide their own gifts, maps to hidden communities, techniques for recognizing disguised bloodlines, methods for testing potential riders without revealing the true purpose of the evaluation. By the time the sun rises over the ruined keep, you possess resources that would have seemed magical just days ago. But you also carry the weight of understanding what will be required if the mission succeeds. The world you save will not be the world you knew, and the people who survive the transformation may no longer be entirely recognizable as human. Are you ready? Princess Rhaenyra asks, as the last of the representatives disappear into the morning sky on their dragons. You look around at the keep that has become the birthplace of a new age, at the scorch marks and symbols that mark where different forms of consciousness have touched the physical world, at the horizon where the future waits with all its terrible possibilities. I don't think anyone could be ready for this, you reply, but I'm willing to try. Then let the true search begin. The weeks that follow your departure from the ruined keep blur together in a haze of discovery and growing dread. Armed with the knowledge and resources provided by the gathering of dragon lords, you begin to trace bloodlines that stretch across impossible distances, following threads of ancestry that lead to revelations both wondrous and terrifying. Your first success comes in the port city of Volantis, where the old blood families have maintained their genealogies with religious devotion for centuries. Hidden among the records of marriages and births, you discover references to children who were sent away for special education in the eastern provinces, a euphemism that proves to conceal a network of dragon rider training facilities that have operated in secret for generations. The facility you eventually locate sits in a valley beyond the Rhoyne's eastern tributaries, disguised as a monastery dedicated to some obscure fire god. But the moment you approach its gates, the dragon scale that Melara gave you begins to pulse with warmth, and you understand that you have found something significant. The monks who greet you wear the simple robes of religious devotees, but their eyes hold the distinctive violet hue of Valyrian blood, and when they speak, their words carry the careful precision of people who have learned to guard their secrets carefully. "We have been expecting you," says the one who introduces himself as Brother Materes. "The dreams have been growing stronger, calling to those with the gift to prepare for what is coming." The monastery proves to be a facade concealing one of the most sophisticated dragon rider training centers you have ever seen. Hidden chambers beneath the main buildings house libraries that contain techniques for bonding with dragons across dimensional barriers, practice yards where young people learn to fight while their consciousness is partially projected into other realities, and most significantly, a series of pools filled with water that reflects not the surrounding chamber, but distant locations where wild dragons can be observed in their natural habitats. "We have trained 47 riders over the past 20 years, Brother Materes explains as he guides you through the facility. But only 12 have proven capable of forming the deep bonds necessary for the type of warfare that approaches. What happened to the others? They serve in other capacities, Some have become watchers, using their enhanced perception to monitor the barriers between worlds. Others work as coordinators, helping to maintain communication between the scattered communities of dragon blood. A few have chosen to enter the deep sleep, preserving their consciousness in stasis until the time when their particular gifts will be needed. The concept of voluntary stasis disturbs you more than you care to admit. The idea that people would choose to surrender their active lives, spending decades in suspended animation while the world moves forward without them, speaks to a level of dedication that borders on the fanatical. The burden of knowledge grows heavier with each passing year. Brother Materies continues, seemingly reading your thoughts. Those who truly understand what is at stake often find that normal life becomes impossible to maintain. The deep sleep offers respite from the weight of waiting, the constant awareness that everything familiar could end at any moment. You spend 3 days at the monastery, interviewing potential riders and documenting their capabilities. The young people you meet are impressive in their dedication and skill, but there is something in their eyes that speaks of losses you can't quite understand. They move through their training with mechanical precision, perform their assigned tasks with flawless competence, but the joy and spontaneity that should characterize youth seem to have been carefully suppressed. They know too much, explains Sister Dana Rare, one of the few older residents who still maintains active consciousness. We've taught them about the deep ones, about the nature of the coming conflict, about the transformations they'll need to undergo if they're to serve effectively as dragon riders. The knowledge has changed them in ways that make ordinary happiness impossible. Changed them how? They understand that individual desires and personal dreams are luxuries that the world can no longer afford. They've accepted that their lives belong not to themselves but to the greater cause of preserving human consciousness. It's a burden that few minds can bear without losing something essential. The conversation haunts you as you continue your journey, visiting other hidden communities and documenting bloodlines that span the breadth of the known world. Each location reveals new potential riders, new techniques, new insights into the scope of the preparation that has been taking place in secret for decades. But they also reveal the cost of that preparation, the ways in which knowledge of the true situation has transformed the people who carry it. In the ruins of Troyang, you find a community of riders who have learned to bond with dragons that exist primarily in the realm of dreams and memory. Their dragons are magnificent creatures composed of crystallized time and fossilized thought, capable of traveling instantaneously across vast distances by moving through the spaces between conscious moments. But their riders have paid for this ability by sacrificing their connection to the waking world, becoming ghost-like figures who can interact with reality only through tremendous effort of will. We chose this path because it was necessary, explains Lord Derran, the incorporeal, whose physical form flickers in and out of visibility as he speaks. The dragons of dream and memory are immune to the corruption that affects creatures of flesh and blood, but bonding with them requires surrendering most of your connection to the material world. The dragons he shows you are beautiful beyond description, creatures of pure light and shadow that move through the air like living poetry. But watching them you understand that their riders have essentially chosen a form of living death, trading their humanity for the ability to fight in realms where conventional dragons cannot survive. In the golden fields of GoT, you discover children who have been bonded with dragon eggs from the moment of their birth, growing up in perfect harmony with creatures that develop alongside them. These partnerships produce bonds of unprecedented strength and stability, creating rider-dragon pairs that function as single entities with dual consciousness. But the process requires that the children be isolated from normal human contact for the first 15 years of their lives, raised in environments where their only meaningful relationships are with their dragon partners. The result is individuals who possess incredible power, but who struggle to relate to anyone who doesn't share their unique form of consciousness. We create the perfect dragon riders, admits Master Reagan, the facility's chief instructor. But we're not sure if what we create can still be called human in any meaningful sense. Each success in your recruitment efforts is shadowed by the recognition of what has been sacrificed to achieve it. The potential riders you document are capable of feats that would have seemed impossible just months ago, but they are also increasingly isolated from the ordinary experiences that give life meaning and joy. The weight of accumulated knowledge begins to affect your own consciousness in ways that you find difficult to articulate. The dragon scale that guides your searches pulses with increasing frequency, and you begin to experience flashes of perception that extend beyond normal sensory input. You catch glimpses of distant locations, hear fragments of conversations taking place hundreds of miles away, and most disturbing of all, you begin to sense the presence of minds that definitely do not belong to any human consciousness. The deep ones are not passive observers waiting for their moment to strike. They are active participants in current events, their influence spreading through networks of contact that touch every aspect of civilized life. You begin to recognize their touch in the decisions of rulers, the strategies of merchants, the philosophies of scholars who shape public opinion without understanding the sources of their inspiration. The corruption is everywhere. You confide to Septon Kyburn during one of your rare meetings with other members of the conspiracy, not just in the obvious places, but in the fundamental assumptions that guide how people think about reality itself. "You're beginning to see the world as dragons do," he replies, his expression mixing concern with understanding. The enhanced perception that comes with proximity to dragon consciousness reveals connections that normal awareness can't detect, but it also makes ordinary life increasingly difficult to bear. The observation proves prophetic. As your recruitment mission continues, you find yourself growing more isolated from the people around you. Conversations that once seemed meaningful now feel like elaborate exercises in self-deception. Social customs that once provided comfort now seem like carefully maintained illusions designed to prevent people from confronting the reality of their situation. The irony is not lost on you. In learning to resist the Deep One's promise of unified consciousness, you are becoming increasingly unable to relate to the unenhanced consciousness that characterizes normal human experience. The cure for alien influence is creating its own form of isolation, its own barriers to meaningful connection with others. The climax of this realization comes during your visit to the shadow city of Ashai, where you finally encounter one of the Deep Ones directly. The entity appears not as a physical presence, but as a voice in your thoughts, offering relief from the burden of individual awareness that has become increasingly difficult to bear. "You understand now," the voice says, its tone carrying infinite compassion and understanding. The weight of knowledge, the isolation of enhanced perception, the loneliness of seeing truth that others cannot comprehend. Why struggle with these burdens when you could simply let them go? The temptation is real and immediate. The promise of joining a collective consciousness that would share your burden, understand your isolation, and provide the connection that individual awareness makes increasingly impossible to achieve. For a moment, you can see why so many throughout history have chosen corruption willingly. But the dragon scale at your chest pulses with sudden heat, and through its connection to the draconic network, you feel the presence of other minds that have faced the same choice and found the strength to resist, not through rejection of the pain, but through acceptance of it as the price of remaining truly alive. "The burden is the gift," you whisper, words coming from some deep place of understanding. "The isolation is the freedom. The pain of choice is what makes consciousness valuable." The Deep One's presence withdraws, but not before leaving behind a final message that chills you to the bone. You cannot resist forever. Every choice you make brings you closer to understanding that unity is inevitable. We can wait. The encounter leaves you shaken, but also strangely strengthened. You understand now why the dragon riders throughout history have chosen such extreme forms of dedication, why they have accepted isolation and transformation and the loss of ordinary happiness. The alternative is not just personal corruption, but the surrender of everything that makes consciousness worth preserving. As you prepare for the final phase of your recruitment mission, the journey to New Valyria itself, you carry with you the knowledge of what victory will cost and what defeat will mean. The riders you have found are capable of incredible feats, but they are also living testament to the price of preparing for a war that most of the world doesn't even know is coming. The shadow of truth, you realize, is not the darkness that threatens to consume the world. It is the isolation that comes from seeing that darkness clearly, from understanding what must be done to resist it, and from accepting that the people who make that resistance possible may no longer be able to fully participate in the world they are fighting to save. The journey to New Valyria begins at dawn from a hidden harbor on the coast of Volantis, where Captain Maros waits with a ship that bears no resemblance to the trading vessel that brought you from Pentus months ago. This craft is built from materials that seem to shift and flow like living metal, its sails woven from what appears to be dragon wing membrane, and its hull carved with symbols that pulse with the same rhythm as your heartbeat. The smoking sea claims most ships that try to navigate its waters, Captain Maros explains, as his crew prepares for departure. But this vessel was built in New Valyria itself, designed to harmonize with the magical currents that still flow through the ruins of the old empire. As the ship moves away from familiar coastlines and into waters that no chart in Westeros has ever accurately mapped, you begin to understand why the survivors chose this location for their hidden city. The sea around the ruins of Old Valyria doesn't just steam with residual heat from the ancient doom, it exists in a state of constant flux between different realities, creating natural camouflage that would hide entire civilizations from anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. The dragon scale that has guided your journey pulses with increasing intensity as you approach the heart of the smoking sea, and through its connection to the draconic network, you begin to sense the presence of minds that have been waiting for your arrival. Not just individual dragon riders, but something vast and collective that encompasses dozens of consciousness linked together in ways that transcend normal human experience. You're feeling the confluence, explains Valeriana, who has joined you for this final stage of the journey. When dragon riders live and work together for extended periods, their consciousness begins to merge at the edges, creating a form of collective awareness that maintains individual identity while allowing for unprecedented cooperation. The first glimpse of New Valyria comes not as a visual revelation, but as a shift in the very nature of reality around the ship. The water becomes clearer, the air takes on a quality that makes every breath feel more substantial, and the horizon begins to shimmer with possibilities that exist just beyond normal perception. Then the city itself emerges from the mists like a dream becoming solid, and you understand that everything you thought you knew about architecture, engineering, and the relationship between consciousness and physical matter has been inadequate preparation for what the survivors have accomplished. New Valyria is not built on the ruins of the old empire. It is grown from them, shaped by 50 years of dragon fire, applied with such precision that stone and metal have been transformed into something that responds to thought and intention. The towers spiral upward in patterns that follow the mathematical principles underlying dragon flight, their surfaces covered with scales that have been shed by generations of bonded dragons and fused into the very walls. The city lives, you whisper, watching as balconies reshape themselves to accommodate landing dragons, as bridges extend across chasms in response to the movement of pedestrians below. The city dreams, Valeriana corrects. It shares in the collective consciousness of everyone who lives within its boundaries, growing and changing to meet their needs while maintaining the harmony necessary for dragon riders to function as a unified force. The harbor where your ship docks is carved from a single piece of obsidian that has been shaped into flowing curves that guide water and wind with supernatural efficiency. Dragons rest on perches that rise from the harbor's depths like crystalline trees, their riders moving among them with the casual familiarity of people who have spent their entire lives in perfect partnership with creatures of legend. But it's the people themselves who provide the most striking revelation. These are not the desperate survivors you had imagined, clinging to ancient traditions in hidden refuges. These are the inhabitants of a civilization that has surpassed everything that old Valyria achieved at its height, and they move through their transformed city with the confident grace of beings who have solved problems that lesser civilizations couldn't even articulate. Princess Rhaenyra meets you at the harbor's edge, but the woman who greets you bears only superficial resemblance to the dragon rider you knew from the ruined keep. Her consciousness has been expanded by months of participation in the confluence, and when she speaks, her words carry harmonics that resonate with meaning on levels beyond normal communication. "You have done well," she says, and through the draconic network, you feel the approval of dozens of other minds whose attention focuses on you with gentle intensity. The bloodlines you have documented, the riders you have tested, the knowledge you have gathered, all of it will be essential for what comes next. The coordinated strike against the corruption sites. That was always the secondary objective, she replies, leading you through streets that pulse with bioluminescent patterns inspired by dragon scales. The primary goal was to determine whether human consciousness could evolve rapidly enough to survive what is actually approaching. The words send a chill through you that has nothing to do with the sea breeze. Instead of answering directly, she guides you to the city's heart, where a structure rises that defies every principle of engineering you have ever encountered. The building appears to be growing from the ground up and the sky down simultaneously, its form constantly shifting as it responds to forces that exist outside normal three-dimensional space. "The observatory of all times," she explains, built using techniques that combine dragonfire with temporal manipulation, allowing us to perceive events across multiple timelines simultaneously. Inside the observatory, you encounter a gathering that includes not just the dragon riders of New Valyria, but representatives of consciousness from across the breadth of space and time. Some are recognizably human. Others have been transformed by their bonds with dragons into something that might be considered a new species, and a few exist as pure thought given temporary form through applications of will that transcend your understanding. The long night approaches, announces a figure whose identity shifts constantly between different possible versions of the same essential being. But it is not the return of the others that threatens the world. The others were always just the visible symptom of something far more fundamental. The observatory's central chamber contains a sphere of crystallized dragonfire that serves as a window into realities that exist beyond normal perception. As you watch, images form within the crystal that show the true scope of what has been approaching for centuries. The deep ones are not invaders from another dimension. They are antibodies produced by existence itself in response to what it perceives as an infection. Human consciousness, with its chaotic creativity and unpredictable individuality, represents a form of life that the underlying structure of reality finds fundamentally threatening. The universe tends toward order, toward patterns that can be predicted and controlled, explains Maester Marwyn, whose presence in the chamber strikes you like a physical blow. Consciousness introduces elements of genuine randomness, choices that cannot be anticipated, changes that cascade through the fabric of space and time in ways that threaten the stability of existence itself. You say, staring at the man whose betrayal has shaped so much of your journey. You're working with them. "I'm working to save reality from dissolution," he replies calmly. Human consciousness has reached a point where its continued expansion threatens not just this world, but the fundamental structures that allow any world to exist. The Deep Ones offer a solution that preserves human life while eliminating the chaotic elements that threaten universal stability. And the Dragon Riders are the ultimate expression of consciousness chaos. Princess Rhaenyra interjects, her voice carrying harmonics of controlled fury. When human awareness bonds with draconic perception, the result is a form of consciousness that can literally reshape reality through the application of will. We represent everything that the universal order finds most threatening. The crystalline sphere shifts to show you visions of what success for either side would mean. If the deep ones achieve their goals, human consciousness will be preserved but regulated, channeled into patterns that serve universal stability at the cost of everything that makes awareness valuable. If the Dragon Riders succeed in preserving chaotic consciousness, they will need to accept responsibility for managing the instabilities that their existence creates. The choice isn't between freedom and slavery, Marwyn continues. It's between controlled evolution and chaotic dissolution. The Deep Ones offer a path that preserves what can be preserved while eliminating what threatens everything. And what you're offering, you say to Princess Rhaenyra, is the burden of eternal vigilance, of using dragon consciousness to maintain stability while preserving the chaos that makes consciousness valuable. We're offering the chance to grow up as a species, she replies, to accept responsibility for the consequences of our existence while refusing to sacrifice what makes that existence worth preserving. The debate that follows involves perspectives from across the spectrum of evolved consciousness, arguments that span philosophical frameworks you lack the concepts to fully understand. But gradually, through participation in the confluence, you begin to grasp the true scope of what is being decided. The coordinated strike against the corruption sites was never meant to be a military victory in any conventional sense. It was designed to demonstrate whether human consciousness could evolve rapidly enough to take responsibility for its own impact on the structure of reality. The test isn't whether we can destroy the others, you realize. It's whether we can become the kind of beings who deserve to continue existing in a universe that we're constantly changing through the act of being conscious. Exactly, confirms a voice that seems to come from the city itself, from the collective consciousness of everyone who has contributed to New Valeria's creation. And the answer to that test will determine not just the fate of this world, but the future of consciousness itself across all possible realities. The revelation that emerges from the crystalline sphere reshapes your understanding of everything that has happened since you first discovered those dragon scales in the hidden chamber. The whispered legends of dragon power were true, but they were only the beginning of a story that encompasses the fundamental nature of existence itself. Dragons are not weapons or tools or even partners in any conventional sense. They are expressions of the creative force that allows consciousness to reshape reality, manifestations of the principle that makes change and growth and evolution possible in a universe that would otherwise crystallize into perfect sterile order. The whisper lost in time, you murmur, remembering the fragmentary vision that began your journey, has grown into a storm across eternity. And now Princess Rhaenyra says her consciousness merging with yours through the draconic network to share the full weight of what must be decided. We must choose whether that storm will destroy everything it touches or transform it into something greater than what came before. The choice, when it comes, feels both inevitable and impossible. Accept the Deep One's offer of controlled consciousness and preserve what can be preserved of human experience. Or embrace the Dragon Rider's path of chaotic responsibility and risk everything on the possibility that consciousness can learn to manage its own power. Looking around the observatory at the representatives of evolved awareness, at the city that dreams and grows and changes in response to the needs of its inhabitants, at the crystalline sphere that shows all possible futures branching out from this moment of decision, you understand that the game was never about politics or power, or even survival in any mundane sense. It was about whether consciousness itself has the right to continue existing in a universe that it constantly changes through the act of awareness. And the answer to that question will be written not in the outcome of battles or the rise and fall of kingdoms, but in the choices made by individuals who accept the burden of being truly alive in a reality that offers no guarantees except the opportunity to choose. The storm across eternity waits for your decision, and the echo of every choice ever made resonates through the crystalline heart of New Valyria, where dragons dream of futures that have not yet been born, and consciousness prepares to face the ultimate test of its right to exist. The decision crystallizes not through debate or deliberation, but through the sudden recognition that it has already been made by every choice you have witnessed throughout your journey, every bloodline preserved in secret, every rider who accepted transformation, every individual who chose the burden of enhanced consciousness over the comfort of ignorance. All of them have been answering the fundamental question posed by existence itself. We choose responsibility, you say, and the words carry through the confluence to every mind connected to New Valyria's network. We choose the burden of managing our own chaos rather than surrendering it to forces that would eliminate what makes us human. The response is immediate and overwhelming. Through the crystalline sphere, you see the coordinated strike begin not as a military operation, but as a declaration of consciousness, asserting its right to exist in defiance of universal order. Dragons rise from hidden cities across the known world and beyond, their riders linked through the draconic network in a demonstration of cooperative chaos that reshapes the very fabric of reality. But this is not the simple battle against corruption sites that you had originally envisioned. The dragon riders are not destroying the others' gathering places, they are transforming them, using dragon fire to create stable pockets of managed chaos where consciousness can exist without threatening the underlying structure of reality. The barriers between worlds were never meant to keep the deep ones out. Princess Rhaenyra explains, as her consciousness merges more fully with yours through the confluence. They were meant to create spaces where different forms of awareness could coexist without destroying each other. Through the observatory's windows, you watch as the operation unfolds across multiple dimensions simultaneously. In the frozen wastes beyond the wall, dragon fire burns not to destroy but to purify, cleansing corruption while establishing new forms of order that can accommodate both stability and change. The others, freed from the Deep One's influence, begin to remember their original purpose as guardians rather than destroyers. The long night was never about ice and darkness, you understand, watching as the ancient enemies of humanity transform back into the protectors they were meant to be. It was about the universe's attempt to impose order on consciousness, and consciousness's refusal to be ordered. In the Shadowlands beyond Ashai, dragons of dream and memory work alongside their incorporeal riders to establish networks of communication that span the boundaries between waking and sleeping consciousness. The Jade Sea Kingdoms contribute their underwater dragons to create sanctuaries where thoughts can develop in the deep places of the mind without being corrupted by surface concerns. Each success builds upon the others, creating a cascade of transformation that spreads across not just the known world, but through the underlying structures of reality itself. The universe is learning to accommodate consciousness rather than fight it, to incorporate chaos as a necessary component of a truly stable system. But the greatest revelation comes when you realize that Maester Marwyn's presence in New Valyria was not betrayal but the final component of a plan that required someone to advocate for the Deep One's perspective with complete sincerity. You knew, you say to him, as the operation reaches its crescendo. You knew that the universe needed to hear its own argument presented honestly before it could choose to evolve beyond the need for that argument. I believed every word I spoke, he replies, his consciousness beginning to shift as the success of the coordinated transformation becomes undeniable. But belief and purpose are not always the same thing. The Deep Ones required a true advocate, someone who genuinely thought their solution was correct, in order for the universe to fully understand what it was choosing between. The final phase of the resolution involves not victory over the Deep Ones, but integration with them. As the Dragon Riders succeed in establishing stable pockets of managed chaos, the universe's antibodies begin to evolve as well, becoming partners in maintaining the new form of order rather than opponents of consciousness itself. This is what the ancient dragon lords saw in their visions, Valina explains, as the last of the corruption sites transforms into something that serves both stability and change. Not conquest or destruction, but synthesis, the evolution of reality itself to accommodate forms of existence that had previously been incompatible. The observatory's crystalline sphere shifts to show you the broader implications of what has been accomplished. The barriers between worlds still exist, but they now serve as membranes that allow for controlled exchange rather than absolute separation. The others continue their eternal watch, but they guard borders that permit growth rather than enforce stagnation. The deep ones persist in their role as universal regulators, but they regulate through guidance rather than domination. Most significantly, human consciousness has proven itself capable of accepting responsibility for its own impact on reality. The dragon riders of New Valyria and their counterparts across the world have become something new, gardeners of chaos, shepherds of change, beings who can manage the creative force that makes evolution possible without allowing it to destroy the foundations upon which all existence depends. The bloodlines you sought were never just about finding dragon riders, Princess Rhaenyra tells you, as the immediate crisis passes and the new order begins to establish itself. They were about locating individuals who could serve as bridges between different forms of consciousness, translators who could help the universe understand what it was becoming. The transformation is not complete, and perhaps it never will be. The new form of reality that emerges from the resolution requires constant maintenance, ongoing attention from beings who understand both the necessity of order and the value of chaos. The Dragon Riders have not won a war so much as accepted employment as eternal mediators in a conflict that will continue as long as consciousness exists. What happens now, you ask, though part of you already knows the answer. Now we build, she replies, not kingdoms or empires, but networks of consciousness that can span worlds and dimensions while maintaining the individual awareness that makes consciousness valuable. We become the bridges between what was and what could be. The role she describes is simultaneously magnificent and humbling. The Dragon Riders will not rule in any conventional sense. They will serve as facilitators, helping other forms of consciousness develop the capacity to manage their own creative chaos. They will be teachers, guides, gardeners of the spaces between worlds where new forms of awareness can develop without threatening the stability of existence itself. Your own transformation is perhaps the most profound of all. The knowledge you have gained, the connections you have formed through the draconic network, the consciousness you have developed through participation in the confluence, all of it has prepared you for a role that extends far beyond anything you could have imagined when you first discovered those dragon scales in the hidden chamber. You will return to the world, Princess Rhaenyra explains, but not as the person who left it. You will serve as one of the first bridges, helping ordinary human consciousness understand what has changed and what it means for their daily lives. The prospect is both exciting and terrifying. The world you return to will be fundamentally different from the one you left, but most of its inhabitants will not immediately understand the nature of that difference. They will need guides who can help them navigate the new reality without losing touch with what makes them human. The dragon that will carry you back to more familiar lands is unlike any creature you have encountered during your journey. Formed from crystallized time and fossilized possibility, it exists partially in multiple dimensions simultaneously, allowing it to travel between worlds while maintaining stable contact with each one. She has been waiting for you since before you were born, explains the dragon's primary rider, whose consciousness exists in a state of constant flux between different possible versions of herself. Her purpose is to serve as your partner in the work of building bridges between forms of awareness that have never communicated directly before. The bond that forms between you and the temporal dragon is unlike anything described in the histories of conventional dragon riding. Instead of dominance or partnership, It represents a form of symbiosis where your consciousness provides stability while hers provides access to the broader networks of awareness that span the transformed reality. As you prepare to leave New Valyria, you carry with you not just knowledge but responsibility. The network of dragon riders will continue to expand, drawing in individuals whose consciousness proves capable of managing creative chaos without being consumed by it. Each new rider will serve as another node in the growing web of awareness that helps maintain the balance between order and change. The transformed others will play their own role, serving as guardians of the boundaries between different forms of consciousness while allowing for controlled interaction between them. The Deep Ones will continue their work as universal regulators, but their regulation will focus on maintaining the conditions necessary for growth rather than preventing it. Most importantly, ordinary human consciousness will have the opportunity to evolve at its own pace, developing the capacity to participate in the broader networks of awareness without losing the individual perspective that makes each person unique. The game was never about power. You realize as your dragon prepares for departure. It was about growing up as a species, about learning to be conscious responsibly in a universe that consciousness constantly changes. And now, the real game begins, Princess Rhaenyra replies, her consciousness touching yours one final time through the confluence. The game of building a reality where all forms of awareness can coexist and evolve together. As you rise into the sky above New Valyria, carried by a dragon that exists across multiple timelines simultaneously, you see the city below transforming once again. New towers spiral upward to accommodate the expanded consciousness of its inhabitants. New harbors open to welcome visitors from dimensions that had previously been inaccessible. New gardens bloom with possibilities that exist only in the spaces between different forms of reality. The whisper that began in a hidden chamber beneath Pentos has indeed grown into a storm across eternity, but it is a storm of creation rather than destruction, a tempest of possibility that transforms everything it touches while preserving what makes each transformation valuable. The world you return to will never be the same, but then again, neither will you. The person who discovered those dragon scales was seeking knowledge about bloodlines and genealogies. The person who carries that knowledge back to the world understands that every bloodline is connected to every other, that every individual consciousness is part of a vast network of awareness that spans not just space and time, but the very foundations of existence itself. The Dragon Riders have not conquered the world. They have accepted responsibility for helping it grow into something greater than anyone had dared to imagine. And in that acceptance, they have transformed not just themselves but the very nature of what it means to be conscious in a universe that consciousness itself is constantly creating and recreating through the act of being aware. The journey back to the familiar world unfolds across landscapes that exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions, as your temporal dragon navigates through spaces that conventional geography cannot contain. Through her enhanced perception, you witness the aftermath of the great transformation rippling outward from its epicenters, reshaping not just the physical world, but the fundamental nature of how consciousness interacts with reality. The frozen wastes beyond the wall have become gardens of ice and crystal, where the transformed others tend to structures that serve as communication nodes between different forms of awareness. The ancient castles that once marked humanity's desperate attempts to hold back the darkness now function as libraries, where knowledge flows freely between species that had never before been able to communicate directly. In the free cities, the changes are more subtle, but no less profound. The merchant princes of Volantis speak of dreams that provide insights into market fluctuations across distant continents, while the Iron Bank of Bravos reports that their calculations now must account for possibilities that exist in parallel timelines. The Faceless Men find their shape-changing abilities enhanced by access to versions of themselves that exist in alternate realities. But it is in the interactions between ordinary people that the true scope of the transformation becomes apparent. Consciousness itself has become more fluid, more capable of forming temporary connections with other minds when circumstances require cooperation or understanding. The rigid boundaries that once separated individual awareness have become permeable membranes that allow for limited sharing while preserving personal identity. Your dragon settles to rest beside a small lake in the disputed lands, where you encounter a group of refugees whose village was transformed during the final phase of the coordinated operation. They are not distressed by their displacement. Instead, they speak with wonder about experiences that expand their understanding of what it means to be alive. The walls of our houses became transparent, explains an elderly woman whose eyes now carry flecks of the same violet that marks dragon riders. Not to sight, but to feeling, we could sense the emotions of our neighbors, understand their needs before they spoke them aloud. It was frightening at first, but then it became beautiful. A young man, perhaps 20 years of age, demonstrates an ability that would have been considered impossible just months ago. By focusing his attention on a withered tree beside the lake, he encourages it to bloom with flowers that exist partially in this dimension and partially in others, creating beauty that can be perceived by consciousness but not fully captured by conventional senses. The dragon fire did something to the boundary between thought and reality, he explains. It made them more connected, more responsive to each other. We can shape small things now, heal minor injuries, even communicate with animals that had never shown interest in human contact before. These are not dragon riders in any formal sense, but the transformation has touched them nonetheless, giving them access to abilities that bridge the gap between ordinary human awareness and the enhanced consciousness that comes with draconic bonding. They represent the beginning of humanity's broader evolution, the first generation to grow up in a reality where consciousness and the physical world exist in more intimate partnership. The political implications of these changes ripple through every kingdom and city-state in the known world. Kings who once ruled through force of arms discover that their subjects can sense the emotions behind their commands, making deception and manipulation far more difficult to maintain. Merchants find that their negotiations must account for levels of understanding that transcend spoken language. Scholars report that their research now draws upon collective knowledge networks that span continents. In King's Landing, the Iron Throne itself has been transformed by proximity to dragonfire during the final operation. The twisted metal swords that form its structure now pulse with faint light, and those who sit upon it report experiencing visions of possible futures that help them make decisions that serve not just their immediate interests, but the long-term well-being of their subjects. The changes are not uniformly welcome. Some individuals, particularly those whose power depended upon maintaining ignorance or division, resist the new transparency that characterizes transformed consciousness. They retreat to remote locations where the influence of dragonfire remains minimal, establishing communities dedicated to preserving older forms of awareness. Evolution cannot be forced. Your dragon communicates through the bond you share, her thoughts carrying harmonics of ancient wisdom. Those who choose to remain unchanged serve their own purpose in the greater pattern. They preserve perspectives that might otherwise be lost, maintaining diversity of consciousness that strengthens the overall network. The insight proves prophetic as you encounter various communities that have responded to the transformation in different ways. Some embrace the enhanced connectivity and work to develop new forms of art, philosophy, and science that take advantage of expanded awareness. Others focus on maintaining traditional practices while gradually adapting to the changed reality. Still, others reject the changes entirely, creating enclaves where pre-transformation consciousness is preserved as completely as possible. Balance, you murmur, understanding flooding through you as you observe the diverse responses to humanity's evolution. The network requires all of these approaches to remain stable. The dragon riders themselves have dispersed from their hidden strongholds to serve as facilitators throughout the world, helping communities navigate the challenges and opportunities that come with enhanced consciousness. They do not rule or command. Instead, they offer guidance to those who seek it and protection to those who need it. Princess Rhaenyra has established herself in the ruins of Harrenhal, where the melted stone provides an ideal foundation for experiments in consciousness-responsive architecture. The castle is slowly rebuilding itself according to patterns that emerge from the collective needs of its inhabitants, creating spaces that adapt to serve whatever purposes their users require. "We are midwives to a new form of civilization," she explains during one of your visits to her transformed stronghold. "Our role is not to shape what emerges, but to help it emerge safely." The metaphor proves apt, as you witness the birth of institutions and practices that have no precedent in human history. Schools where knowledge is transmitted through direct consciousness transfer rather than verbal instruction. Markets where value is determined by the genuine benefit that goods and services provide to community well-being rather than mere scarcity or demand. Governments that function through consensus emerged from temporarily merged awareness rather than through competition between separate interests. The emotional adjustment to these changes proves as significant as the practical adaptations. Many people struggle with the loss of privacy that comes with enhanced connectivity, even though the new forms of consciousness include protections for individual mental space. Others find the expanded awareness overwhelming, requiring training to manage the flow of information and sensation that accompanies their evolved perceptions. Growing pains, observes Septon Kyburn, who has dedicated himself to helping religious communities understand how the transformation relates to their spiritual beliefs. Consciousness is learning to be conscious of itself in ways that were previously impossible. The adjustment period was always going to be difficult. Your own role in this adjustment period evolves as your understanding deepens. The knowledge you gained during your recruitment mission, combined with your experience of the draconic network, positions you to serve as a translator between different forms of awareness. You help traditional scholars understand how their research can benefit from enhanced consciousness, assist merchants in adapting their practices to serve the needs of transformed communities, and guide political leaders as they navigate the complexities of governing populations whose awareness spans multiple dimensions. The work is exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Each day brings new challenges as consciousness explores the boundaries of its enhanced capabilities, new opportunities as communities discover innovative ways to solve problems that had seemed intractable under the old forms of awareness, and new insights into the fundamental nature of what it means to be alive in a universe that consciousness itself is constantly creating. The temporal dragon that serves as your partner in this work proves invaluable in navigating the complexities of the transformed world. Her ability to perceive events across multiple timelines allows her to anticipate developments before they manifest in the primary reality, providing advance warning of potential problems and opportunities for intervention. Through her expanded perception, you begin to understand that the transformation of consciousness is not a single event but an ongoing process that will continue for generations. Each individual who learns to manage enhanced awareness contributes to the collective knowledge base that makes the process easier for those who come after. Each community that successfully adapts to the new reality provides a model that other communities can study and modify to suit their own needs. The Dragon Riders of New Valyria continue their work as guardians and facilitators, but they are no longer the only ones capable of managing creative chaos. Ordinary humans are developing their own techniques for navigating enhanced consciousness, creating their own networks of mutual support, and establishing their own traditions for maintaining the balance between individual identity and collective awareness. "We are becoming unnecessary," Princess Rhaenyra observes with satisfaction during one of your regular conferences. "Not because our work is complete, but because others are learning to do the work themselves." The observation marks a turning point in your understanding of what success means in this new reality. The goal was never to create a permanent class of enhanced beings who would guide ordinary humans from positions of superior awareness. The goal was to help consciousness itself evolve to the point where such guidance would no longer be necessary. As the first year of the transformed world draws to a close, you find yourself reflecting on the journey that began with the discovery of dragon scales in a hidden chamber. The person who made that discovery was seeking knowledge about bloodlines and genealogies, hoping to advance their career as a researcher of noble ancestry. The person who reflects on that discovery understands that every bloodline is part of a single family tree that encompasses all conscious beings, that every genealogy is a chapter in the story of awareness learning to understand itself, and that the career of research has transformed into a calling to serve the ongoing evolution of consciousness itself. The transformation is far from complete, and perhaps it never will be. Consciousness continues to discover new possibilities, new ways of being aware, new forms of connection that transcend the boundaries that once seemed absolute. Each discovery brings both opportunities and challenges, requiring constant adaptation and growth. But the foundation has been established. Consciousness has proven that it can accept responsibility for its own power, that it can manage creative chaos without being consumed by it, that it can evolve while preserving what makes individual awareness valuable. The whisper that grew into a storm across eternity has become the foundation for a new form of existence, one where the boundaries between dreaming and waking, between self and other, between possibility and reality, serve as membranes that allow for connection rather than walls that enforce separation. The years that follow blur together like pages in a book written by consciousness itself, each chapter revealing new depths of what it means to be aware in a universe that awareness is constantly reshaping. Your temporal dragon has become more than a companion. She is a living bridge between the person you were and the being you are becoming, her crystalline form reflecting the light of possibilities that exist across infinite timelines. Tonight, as you rest beside the trident, where it flows through meadows that now bloom with flowers that exist in 7 dimensions simultaneously, you feel the gentle pulse of the draconic network carrying messages of peace across the transformed world. The harsh edges of the old reality have softened into something more responsive, more alive, more capable of nurturing the growth that consciousness requires. The dragons that once seemed like weapons of conquest now soar through skies that shimmer with aurora born from the harmony between thought and reality. Their songs echo across valleys where the transformed others tend gardens of ice and starlight, their ancient duty fulfilled not through eternal vigilance against invasion, but through the nurturing of spaces where different forms of awareness can meet and learn from each other. From the ruins of old Valyria, where new Valyria continues to grow and change with each passing season, comes the soft whisper of dragon dreams carrying wisdom to those who sleep. The city has become a living library, its walls storing not just knowledge, but the experiences of every consciousness that has ever contributed to its growth. Children born within its boundaries inherit not just the capacity for enhanced awareness, but the accumulated wisdom of generations who learn to be conscious responsibly. The smoking sea itself has transformed into something more beautiful than its original name could capture. Waters that once steamed with the residue of ancient destruction now flow with currents of pure possibility, carrying ships that sail not just between ports but between realities. The merchant princes who once sought only gold now trade in experiences, in moments of understanding, in the kind of connections that make consciousness valuable. In the lands beyond the wall, where the long night once threatened to extinguish all warmth and light, a different kind of illumination now dances across the horizon. The aurora that plays through those northern skies is born from the peaceful interaction between the forces of order and chaos, ice and fire, stability and change. The ancient fortresses that once marked humanity's desperate attempts to hold back the darkness now serve as hostels where travelers from different dimensions can rest and share their stories. The Iron Throne, that symbol of power, won through conquest and held through fear, has become something unprecedented in the history of governance. Those who sit upon it now do so not as rulers but as servants, their enhanced consciousness allowing them to perceive the true needs of their people and the consequences of every decision across multiple timelines. The throne itself has grown, its twisted metal flowering into something that resembles a living tree, its roots extending deep into the earth, while its branches reach toward stars that exist in parallel realities. Your own transformation continues with each passing season. The knowledge you carry is no longer a burden, but a gift that flows freely to those who need it. The connections you have formed through the Draconic Network allow you to serve communities across vast distances, helping them navigate the ongoing evolution of consciousness while preserving what makes each culture unique and valuable. The temporal dragon rests beside you, her form shifting gently between the crystalline structure that exists in this dimension and the pure energy that spans all realities. Through your bond with her, you can feel the contentment that comes from purpose fulfilled, not through conquest or domination, but through the patient work of helping consciousness learn to be conscious of itself. The children who are born into this transformed world carry capabilities that would have seemed godlike to earlier generations, but they wear their gifts lightly, understanding instinctively that power exists to serve rather than to command. They learn to communicate with dragons as naturally as their ancestors learned to speak, to perceive possibilities across multiple timelines as easily as looking at a landscape, to shape reality through focused intention while remaining aware of their responsibility to the broader network of consciousness. The deepest peace comes from understanding that the game was never about winning or losing in any conventional sense. It was about growing, about learning, about becoming worthy of the incredible gift of awareness in a universe that awareness itself is constantly creating. The Dragon Riders succeeded not because they conquered their enemies, but because they helped their enemies remember what they had forgotten about the beauty of individual consciousness. The Deep Ones continue their work as universal regulators, but their regulation now serves growth rather than suppression. They help maintain the delicate balance that allows different forms of consciousness to coexist without destroying each other, their influence flowing through the network like a gentle current that keeps the vast ocean of awareness from becoming either stagnant or chaotic. The others patrol the boundaries between realities, but their vigilance now protects the diversity of consciousness rather than enforcing uniformity. They guard the sacred spaces where new forms of awareness can develop without interference, where the next stage of evolution can unfold according to its own natural rhythm. And in the quiet moments between the great events that shape the course of history, in the spaces where individual consciousness touches the infinite possibility that surrounds it, the whisper that began this journey continues to echo across eternity. Not as a call to conquest or a warning of danger, but as a gentle reminder that every moment of awareness is a miracle, every choice a sacred act, every connection between conscious beings a thread in the vast tapestry of existence. The dragons dream now in peace, their ancient duty transformed into something more beautiful than war could ever be. They dream of futures where consciousness continues to evolve, where awareness becomes ever more capable of managing its own creative power, where the universe itself grows in complexity and beauty through the act of being perceived by minds that understand their responsibility to what they perceive. As sleep approaches, carrying with it dreams that span multiple realities and possibilities that exist only in the spaces between thoughts, you feel the gentle presence of consciousness itself, vast and ancient and eternally young, surrounding you with the kind of peace that comes from understanding your place in something infinitely larger than yourself. The last Dragon Riders have become the first gardeners of a new form of existence, tending the spaces where consciousness can grow safely while remaining true to what makes it valuable. Their vigil continues not through force or fear, but through love, through patience, through the endless willingness to help awareness learn to be aware of itself. The whisper has become a lullaby, sung by dragons who dream of tomorrow while guarding the sleep of a world that has learned to dream responsibly. And in that dreaming, in that gentle vigilance, in that patient nurturing of the spaces where consciousness can flourish, the true victory is written, not in the histories of conquest, but in the quiet moments where awareness touches infinity and finds it good. Sleep well, knowing that dragons watch over dreams where anything is possible and everything is loved.